Welcome to Worlds Unbound. Make sure to visit the story page on Royal Road to support the author, or to follow along. Link in the description. Video created with permission from author. First Contact. By Ralts Bloodthorne. Synopsis. 8,000 years after the glassing of Earth, Terran Descent Humanity has largely become a post-scarcity society based on consent and enjoying life. With the discovery of another ancient race beyond the Great Gulf, events and history collide to draw the Terran Confederacy into war against a 100-million-year-old empire that has always won and believes it always will. With allies and enemies of multiple species, the Orion Galactic Arm Spur will be racked by warfare the likes of which have not been seen. Cracked, harried, wounded, and damaged, Terran Descent Humanity willfully throws itself against the universe itself. The universe hates you and will take away everything you love, laughing while it does so. Terran belief. Told largely from the viewpoint of other species, the story is currently ongoing. It involves graphic depictions of violence, war, adult language and situations, drug use, and other mature topics. End of synopsis. Thok eats an ice cream cone. Thok carefully unwrapped himself from the clutching confines of his ceramic drop shell, moving his limbs carefully so as not to crack the shell or damage any of the precious equipment that might have survived the perilous drop into the heart of the enemy's homeworld. He would need the maps, the recorders, and the Confederate cache sticks that had been collected from dead Terrans off the battlefield. He would need the counterfeited equipment of a Manti tourist, and some of the special equipment hidden in the harness he would need to wear would allow him to emulate a Manti to any and all sensors with the notable exception of Terran biological optics. The yellow sun high in the strangely blue sky warmed Thok's carapace, making him feel more awake, more alive than he would normally have felt after a 18-month cold drift to the enemy home world of the Terrasol Third Republic, the home world of the only intelligent mammalian predator in the known universe. With their warlike ways, innovativeness at devising war material, and fearsomeness on the field of battle, Thok was slightly surprised that he was even alive, not burned down by the extensive planetary and air defense systems the Terrans possessed. He was not drowned in one of those scattered oceans, and not killed by a fast-moving piece of space dust puncturing his drop pod, nor did his graver pulsars malfunction and smear him across one of the fractured pieces of the proto-continent. Looking carefully around, his vision enhanced by his combat visor, Thok saw why he had not been shot down or incinerated by one of those massive weapons emplacements that Hive Intelligence believed covered the entire surface of Terrasol. He was at the edge of one of the huge facilities Terrans seemed to be obsessed with creating, the massive bulk of weapons, and the huge, hulking shapes of Terran warships were everywhere to the magnetic north of Thok. East and west were strips of light forest, nice for aesthetic reasons and producing oxygen, if you breathed it. Thok enjoyed the sweet smell of nitrogen that permeated the atmosphere in undreamed of quantities. No wonder the Terran mammals fought so hard to protect their homeworld, the very air nourished normal intelligent life. Thok wondered at the sweet atmosphere, reaching into the pod and pressing the auto-destruct sequence. With a hiss, the pod shivered and collapsed into dust that stirred in the sweet-smelling breeze from the huge metropolis to the south of Thok's landing site. Thok activated his recorders and began moving south, toward the large city that the Trinad mothers had named Ninth Swarming Place of Furless Mammals, and the Terrans called New Angelos. By the time the warm yellow sun had crested its zenith and began moving toward the horizon, Thok had been picked up by a well-meaning, nearly polite Terran, and given a ride on the back of a fearsomely fast two-wheeled transport that roared and shivered and moved like some kind of reptile in and out of the ground-effect vehicle traffic. The talkative mammal had mistaken him for one of the traitorous Manti, one of the mammal's ally, who had missed something called a bus. The mammal had given him a ride all the way into the center of the huge metropolis, dropping him off in the center market to do some sightseeing. The two words meant the same to Thok, and he wondered exactly what visioning could hold for a tourist to Terrasol as he wandered the spacious streets of the city. Looking around, Thok felt his mind reel as he looked up at the huge buildings, some of them taller than the hive Thok had grown from a larvae. Terrans were everywhere, moving about rapidly, and grunting at one another in Terran standard. To Thok the language sounded just as brutal as the Terrans themselves. The ground vibrated underneath the city, and Thok barely kept his cool, nearly screaming aloud as the very ground shook beneath his feet. Some of the beings around him stared, and Thok heard more than one instance of the brutish sound Thok knew served as Terran laughter. He could not believe it. The Terrans took no notice of planet instability. That would enable them to live on more planetary bodies than anyone had ever thought. That knowledge alone would guarantee that the hive mothers would be pleased with Thok's performance. No wonder the mammals fought like the insane. They came from a planet that was just as unstable as they were. He took pictures carefully, making sure nobody could see his actions as he recorded both the buildings and the masses of beings that hurried about their business. He was careful to record the mammals entering buildings in great detail. In one instance, Thok carefully recorded every available site of a place that turned away any who were not Terran military. He wondered what the facility, named Harv's Bar and Grill, could possibly be. Weapons research? Strategy planning? Cybernetics or power armor manufacturing? Fluttering his vestigial wings in agitation, Thok reluctantly moved away from the tempting building, whose optic-catching hollows seemed almost to try to lure him inside. His sensitive audio receptors, boosted by his head covering, could detect the barking sound of Terran laughter, the sound of glass on glass, glass on plastic, plastic on plastic, and both glass and plastic on metal. Whatever activity was happening inside was plainly quite exciting to the Terrans inside, but the two huge, hulking Terran soldiers on either side of the door intimidated Thok to the point he would not even try to peer inside the brightly lit window. By nearly sunset, Thok was beginning to become nervous as he wanted the streets of the gigantic habitation complex. All around him beings were moving about, and on some corners beings nervously hawked wares to reluctant appearing beings. More than once a male or female Terran would approach another Terran, and they would leave together to enter a building. While he often saw the same being who waited to be approached, he rarely saw the one who made the approach again. Some beings were beginning to stare, and Thok became sure that sooner or later, some being would recognize he was a Trinad instead of a Manti, and the military would be called in to take him into custody. He knew that if the Terrans took him prisoner, he would be cooked over hot liquid vapor, cracked open, and eaten with sauce. Every Trinad knew that was what the Terrans did with captured Trinad, and Thok had seen Terrans dismember, dehell, and devour reddish, exoskeleton-clad creatures whose forward digits ended in claws. To Thok's horror, he had seen more than one feeding establishment with the lifeforms caged in transparent cells, filled with salinated water, to be picked out by one of the Terrans, and then, after a suitable wait, devoured. Thok shivered and tried to think of a way to avoid notice and possible devouring. Quickly looking around, Thok saw quite a few beings purchasing the wares of a stand marked ice cream in Terran standard, and took note of the fact that no being seemed to take notice of any being that devoured the ware. He recorded the stand, including spectrograph analysis, electromagnetic scan, and full visual. He worked up his courage and approached, his senses picking up a rich mixture of complex protein chemicals emanating from the cart. Curious, Thok stood in line and eventually reached the front of the line, drawing closer and closer to the source of those wonderful airborne scents. One of the squat, bulky mammals was offering a cold semi-solid, topping a wrapped bread-like wafer substance. His hairless face was contorted into what high-home intelligence had briefed Thok was the equivalent of a smile. To Thok, it looked like a gestured intention of imminent devouring, with the bared meat-tearing teeth of one of the galaxy's few intelligent predators. Thok had seen that expression all day, however, and was past the initial flinching stage that he had been in when first confronted by a grimacing mammal. "Ice cream, gentle being? I have chocolate, raspberry, strawberry, mint chocolate chip, or vanilla left," the man told Thok, speaking in rapid galactic standard heavily accented with the brutish Terran tones. "Strawberry," Thok half mused, holding out the Terran credit chip. The man scanned the chip, nodded, then scooped out a chunk of pinkish, frosted material and deposited on the open end of the conically wrapped wafer. The Terran handed Thok the credit chip and the cone, then waved Thok on. The insect warrior moved on, gently testing the cold substance with antenna and equipment, searching to make sure that it was not some type of poison, a mild organic corrosive for cleaning teeth, or a cruel Terran joke that would suddenly eviscerate him in broad daylight in the middle to the street. Complex carbohydrates, frozen H2O, sweetened wafer, no synthetics. It was safe for consumption, and Thok sliced a piece off with one mandible, drawing the rapidly melting piece into his maw. Melted nicely, and the taste reminded Thok of fruit, his favorite dish. The cone was not bad either, kind of tuber taste to it. Almost eagerly, he took one more bite, to see if it was as good the second time he ingested the strange substance. The taste seemed to explode in Thok's brain, and he found himself steadily devouring the strange creation. Some beings looked at him, but turned away smiling that normally terrifying Terran smile. Thok could not care less what other beings did, as long as he had some of this wonderful substance to consume. Here was a creation worth going to war with the Terrans all over again, a secret that showed just how treacherous the mammals were in not sharing it with the all-powerful Trinad hive worlds. Did the stupid little mammals not know that the Trinad were gods, and Thok was the most powerful of them all? He found himself dancing quickly, ignored by passerby, and stopped suddenly, a realization dawning on him. He was invisible. Nobody paid any attention to him. He was invincible. That's why no one dared confront him. Thok looked around slyly with the last realization, searching for a female Trinad, or even a mantis. After all, he was sexy. No female would be able to resist him. Even the Terran females were glancing at him slyly, and for a long moment, Thok was tempted to trying a cross-species sexual encounter, but changed his mind at the sight of their powerful arms and thick, killing digits. The lights of the city were bright, and seemed to emit sounds of their own, turning the city into a sparkling orchestra or sounds that Thok had never imagined in his life. All of the beings he met were friendly toward him, trying to cull the favor of the powerful and wise Thok, and even the Terrans seemed acceptable, now that he no longer had to fear them, since he was invisible, omnipotent, and irresistible. All too soon, though, Thok began worrying that he had forgotten something. Had he revealed himself to some being he should not have? Had he dropped a piece of equipment that would give him away as a Trinad? Had he offended that large Terran cyborg waiting on the corner with a military carryall in his large, killing hand? Had he forgotten the correct steps for the recreational mating dance? Dejectedly, he began searching for a place to spend the night, but the huge, friendly city now seemed to disdain him, until he moved into a small, cluttered side street and huddled up next to a large, smelly container that was cold and surrounded by slimy refuse. As liquid H2O began falling from the sky, he curled into a ball, miserable with the thought he might have forgotten something that the High Mothers wanted, and lamenting the fact that no females found his pheromones attractive. Sleep came slowly and fitfully, and he dreamed of the Terran military cyborgs that he had seen on the streets chasing him through the tunnels of his hive home. When Thok awoke, he discovered some lousy mammal had stolen his foot coverings and rations. Not only was he wet and cold, but he no longer had food that was safe to consume, and his delicate feet would be subject to whatever horrors the Terrans could devise. Fortunately, he still had most of his equipment, and the cred sticks hidden away. He rubbed his vestigial wings together, as he decided that the only recourse he had was to purchase some ice cream to eat, or starve. The passerby for the most part ignored Thok for the next several days, as he spent all of his money on the delectable substance known as ice cream, trying as many different types as possible. He could not believe that the Terrans had devised so many distinct flavors. What geniuses! Surely the hive mothers would relent and grant the mammals honored being status in the hive if they would just share the wonderful recipe of delightful concoction with the Trinad. Soon, Thok began selling some of his non-essential equipment to a man on a corner by a house with friendly Terran women who had lots of visitors at night. Soon, the man began trading the wonderful substance to simply record Thok speaking about life in the hive, while two huge Terrans, nearly entirely mechanical, they were so heavily augmented with cybernetics, guarded Thok from the shadowy foes that sought to bring him down. Despite Thok's nervousness about the two fearsome combat cyborgs, the friendly man assured Thok that they were deserters from the Terran military that believed that Terrans and Trinad should work together. Thok could not believe that a simple street vendor sold something that would make the warrior castes of the Trinad appear harmless to the surrounding Terrans and tourists. Nearly as good as the legends of invisibility. And here was a fool who gave the substance for answers even a larvae would know. What fools these Terrans were! No, not fools, they knew who he was, and they would come and get him soon. Those two bodyguards were in fact Terran military, who were measuring Thok for a steaming pot and determining what kind of sauce he would taste good coated with and dipped in. Almost clacking with anxiety, Thok hurried to the nearest spaceport, keeping a whole box of ice cream close at hand the whole way, and boarded a flight to the disputed zone. There, he ordered his freezer stocked full with as many different types of ice cream as he could order. He really wanted to avoid leaving his room. After all, they were out there, waiting to get him, to keep him from breeding with fertile virgins. The whole way to the disputed zone, nobody even suspected the Trinad warrior who ate nothing but ice cream and rubbed its legs together in glee one moment, and whose antennae trembled with fear that they had almost caught him. No one knew that instead of a harmless Manti, peaceful ally of the Terrans, a Trinad warrior, a feared infiltrator to the very cradle of Terrans itself, was among them. Had not the Trinad defeated the Terran military in 22% of all engagements? Had Thok himself done something no other had ever done, visited the Terran home world and survived? Wasn't that man by large artificial pond of liquid H2O one of the men who had asked him harmless questions? What exactly was Rocky Road? There was not any chunks of stone, nor did it have any roads in it. The disputed planet TK-Decorus was easy to reach, and easier to move from the Terran-occupied areas to the small section of the proto-continent that the Trinads still occupied. Before Thok left the Terran-occupied zone, he stole a large, armored ice cream transport vehicle that had specially outfitted to transport the wonderful material. The camouflage built into the vehicle and the bobbing head of a large Terran with a bright red nose and strangely multicolored hair ensured that none of the Terrans would try to stop Thok as he raced out of the Terran-occupied zone. The severed head atop the vehicle cackled the harsh Terran laughter the entire way, striking fear into everyone, but strangely enough, attracting Terran larvae, who tried to flag Thok down with cred sticks. Each crowd of Terran larvae made Thok chitter in terror, and reach into the back of the armored transport for another ice cream bar. He was deathly afraid the small, voracious creatures would manage to stop his armored vehicle and devour him in a larval feeding frenzy. The viscous little larvae were in such a feeding frenzy that they chased him on their large, crushing feet for long distances, their hunting cries loud as they pursued him. He was keening in relief when he finally reached the Trinad-occupied zone, pursued by dozens of Terran assault craft who seemed desperate to regain the armored transport's valuable cargo intact, and because of that, could not bring their heavy weaponry to bear. Despite that, the ferocity of the Terran assault troops forced what small, remaining forces the Trinad had off the planet within hours. But Thok and his invaluable cargo had made it, and once his superiors had sampled the contents of the armored cargo vehicle, they agreed that the loss of a minor planet was nothing compared to the importance of Thok's discovery. While sampling the prize Thok had returned with, Clutch leaders decided that they would use their secret weapon, and the invincibility that it bestowed upon them, on the hotly contested world of Chtikvik, where the Terrans had recently inserted a full clutch of Terran heavy assault marines. Thok's superiors viewed what tapes Thok had not sold off, and agreed, With ice cream in their possession, the mighty Terrans would suffer the fate of any other primate that dared resist a Trinad. Defeat, death, and devouring. Thok and the other warriors gathered together to charge the Terran lines. Their weapons were slung as they moved slowly forward through the line, each of them being handed an ice cream cone by the clutch leader. All present were trembling in anticipation of the substance that would turn them from the universe's lowest form of life, not fit to even gaze upon the stars, much less travel them, to the greatest thing the universe had ever created, the sum of all that was good, wise, clever, sexy, and powerful. They had seen what happened to the Terran Marines stationed nearby as the Trinad sympathizers stole each ice cream shipment as it came through, snagging it right from the Terran naval transports when they touched down, and leaving boxes full of dirt in the place of the crated refrigeration units the ice cream was shipped in. As the ice cream was stolen, the Trinad watched the Terrans closely to see what effect it would have on the Terran warriors. More and more fighting among brood brothers, lack of equipment maintenance, lackluster patrols, a complete falling apart of discipline in a force-feared galaxy wide for their discipline and ferocity. The Terrans went from almost machine-like to a clutch of larvae without hive-mind touch for guidance. Thok's superiors were pleased with Thok's discovery of the secret to Terran ferocity, an ability to become nearly invisible anywhere. Not to mention the ability to breed like some kind of scavengers infesting a giant corpse. They had planned in lengthy conferences, partaking of the wondrous substance Thok had discovered, and finally settling on the morning's operation. During the long trip, having gotten lost several times, they had devoured the cargo of the armored transport, and so had to choose a random world to test the power of ice cream on. Wisely, the clutch lord had pointed at the map, membranes over his eyes, and stated that that world would be the first to fall. Each Trinad left the bunker complexes that had been their home, scuttling forward on powerful legs, holding the ice cream cones high overhead to grant them invisibility and fearsome combat discipline and skill. Many of the cones were half-eaten, and more than one warrior held an empty hand high into the air, snickering to himself with his cleverness at deceiving his superiors into thinking he had not eaten his issued cone. They drew closer and closer to the Terran lines, not a single shot being fired at them. They could feel a surge of victory as they drew ever closer, soon able to see the Terran Marines staring at them in fear and confusion. Elation filled their hearts as they drew ever closer, coming closer than anyone ever had without being discovered and fired on by the fearsome mammals. Some of the Terrans were bent over, convulsing in terror and their diaphragms spasming so they uttered sharp barks of fear and chagrin. "Open fire!" one of the Terrans bellowed, and the fearsome firepower of the Terran Marines tore the attacking insect warriors apart. Some of them managed to stagger within spitting distance of the Terrans, but none of them ever fired a rifle, one warrior stopping between two Marines to dance and preen at them, displaying his invisibility and cleverness. Thok watched the demise of his comrades from behind the boulder where he had stopped to eat his cone, and any cones within reach, and felt sad, but oh well, more would be hatched to replace them. Thok figured he would go back and tell Hive Intelligence what had happened, as soon as he finished this ice cream cone. And maybe the bucket of ice cream in the bunker. End of chapter. Born whole. Vainawan was born whole. Fully formed with his mind full, Vainawan stepped out into the sunlight of the garden's observation deck, looking around with his wide eyes. He was in a duraglass cylinder, overlooking the 8 long horticultural bays, the duraglass hidden beneath layers of dust. Surrounding the structure Vainawan had been born in was nothing but desert with strange streamers of light off in the distance, making the horizon look strange to Vainawan's eyes. "Workday will begin in 15 minutes," a soft voice said from the air. "Thank you," Vainawan said. "Debris must be cleared from hydroponics and greenhouse duraglass surfaces," the voice said. Vainawan nodded, knowing how he would have to complete such an action. Not that he had ever been taught. He had been born knowing his tasks and his duties. Vainawan looked at the duraglass. The glass itself had held through the storm, but the supporting structure had warped, allowing the strange energies from the desert beyond to affect the plant life he had spent full rotations around the sun maintaining. The air was thicker now. He could feel the warmth through the glass. It pleased him. Sighing, Vaina checked his knowledge within his mind. There, crossbreeding, strengthening a plant via selection. He could use faster, more reliable methods than crossbreeding, but those methods were methods of last resort. He looked again at the air gap. The servants had given out rotations ago. He would have to solve it his way. Fungus it is. Vaina stood outside. The strange deadly energies had subsided somewhat, but he was not here to measure them. Instead, he knelt down and examined the fungus. It had spread, driving roots into the sand, feeding off of sunshine as well as the deadly energies. It was good. The crack had gotten wider, wide enough that Vaina could slip his finger into it. The grass seed he'd encouraged through the gap had taken hold, battling the fungus, and had begun to sprout in a fan away from the cracks. Vaina was tired. He had been born whole. He had cared for plant home and the plants within. Vaina laid down on the soft bed of fungi, moss, and basic grass. He sighed and closed his eyes. Vaina was born whole. He knew all there was to know. He knew his place in the world, knew magic words to change plants, knew that plant home was his home. Over the decades he ensured that the lichens and base grasses expanded from plant home. Closer to plant home, where the sand had been defeated and turned into loam, Vaina had planted seeds of tough but attractive bushes and plants. Eventually Vaina laid down in a bed of moss, where his ancestor Vaina had lain when his biological functions had ceased. Vaina was content as he closed his eyes. The next would carry on his work. Vaina was born whole. He knew the secrets of nature, of plant and water. He knew magic words to modify life. He stood on the deck of Crystal Observation Deck, observing how the green had spread out. Plant home was old. The duraglass was discolored in places, the metal had gotten old and brittle. It was time to use magic to pull water from deep beneath the sand that had become soil. The moss and fungi would strip the poison out, and those poisons that the lichens and moss did not filter, Vaina had plans for. Vaina went outside and began to sing. Songs of passion and magic that let him reach down into the rock and bring forth the water. Once the way started flowing, he lay down on the soft moss and went to sleep. His work was done. Vaina was born whole. He knew secrets of nature, of plant and water, of wind and rain, of magic and will. His pointed ears and wide sensitive eyes were reflected in the small creature in front of him, who was yawning as the petals of the flower peeled back. The tiny creature was female, and it was her job to pollinate flowers. A perfect recreation of Vaina, who had used magic to create them. It had been Vaina-12's duty and pleasure to oversee her birth, and the birth of her sisters. She yawned, responded to his singing, and flew into his hand. She preened as he moved through the greenhouses of Plant Home. Happy with his success, Vaina went outside the crystal walls of Plant Home and opened his hand, letting her sense the world around her. She was a queen. She had been born whole. She would fly through the air, now sweet to the taste and no longer choking those who tried to breathe it. Vaina laid down on the moss and closed his eyes. It had taken dozens of decades for his work to be done, and now that it was, he could rest. Vaina had been born whole. He knew secrets, magic, and how to alter life itself. Unlike the others, he knew what he was. He was a wood elf. He knew this because he had been born whole. It had rained the day before, without the acids that turned the plants to soup that soaked into the ground. The acids had been slowly dropping in strength, which meant that Vaina could start singing plants that were more fragile, more gentle. He had been born whole, but his time was nearly done. He sang to the fairies, who sang back and preened. He laid down and slept. Vayner 68 had been born whole. He knew the magic of plants and the secret songs of the Fae. He had traveled far from plant home, for days of walking. The Fae had danced and sang to him that they had seen something beyond their green lands, where the sickness sands spread out from the good healthy green. He pushed aside flowers and walked down grass, pleased at how far the green and plants had grown. 4 days' walk. In front of him he saw another wood elf. The first time he had ever seen another of his kind. "I am Vayner 68, he said. "I am Dam-T-95, the other said. "I greet you. Am I the first you have met?" Vayner asked. Dam-T nodded. "Shall we exchange secrets, songs, and spells?" Vayner smiled. "Of course." Together they sang, telling one another their secrets. "Shall we merge our gardens?" Dam-T asked. "Yes," Vayner answered. Vayner walked back, feeling tired. He laid on the moss, and the fairies sang to him. It had been good. Vayner 129 was born whole. He knew the secrets of plants, the magic of songs, and the dances of the Fae. Plant home was dying. Spells were failing. Songs were no longer answered. He had used the last of his magic to bring into being the little ones. Covered in fur, covered in scale, covered in hide. Flying ones? Swimming ones? Walking ones? He had cast the last spells and the magic was dying as Plant Home died. But Vayner 129 was content. The sky was blue. The stars no longer stripped the plants of their life. The sun no longer seared. The water no longer poisoned, and the air no longer choked. As Plant Home died, Vayner 129 smiled. He was a wood elf. Keeper of the plants. Singer of the songs. His work had made the days warm, the nights cool, water pure, the air sweet, and the land covered in plants. He laid and went to sleep, smiling. Confederate Survey Vessel Puddlejump. Report on Meveline 228. Terraforming complete. Environment stable. Wood Elf-class terraforming systems have shut down in accordance to projections. Estimated time from beginning to full terraforming, 238.5 Solarian years. Looks like a project success. End of chapter. First contact. Chapter 1. "Captain, I've got an anomaly on my scanners," Scantech 3rd Class Kamavar said, breaking the quiet of the bridge. The entire bridge crew, numbering 40 in all, turned and looked at the youthful car as if he had suddenly gone mad. "Out here? Between star systems? This far from the outer rim civilizations?" Captain Holketh asked, blinking his rearmost eyes. "What is it?" The tech checked his scanner again. "It looks like some kind of beacon in real space that is transmitting into jump space." Bridge Executor First Class Lemar lifted his crest to calm the bridge crew, moving forward and bending over the scanner to look at it with his 2 forwardmost eyes, which in ancient times had been to get a good view on whatever plant was about to be eaten. "Indeed, Captain, our young midshipman is correct. It is a beacon of a sort," Ledmar said, shrugging his heavy shoulders to ease the discomfort of stress. He turned to Captain Holketh. "Ours is a mission of exploration into this region. We should see what is broadcasting from real space to jump space. Since the act having a beacon able to reach jump space is something new, I suggest investigation." Second Science Officer Almec put in. His supervisor, First Science Officer Rectech nodded, a safe input to the discussion that wouldn't risk his position. "Very well," Captain Holketh said. He disliked strange things. Strange things had proven dangerous for every species, but as the science officers and the executor had reminded everyone, the mission of the scout ship's seeker of unknown spaces was to explore. He turned to the 4 helmsmen. "Take us down to real space. Let's see what this beacon is. All crew, prepare for real space entry." Crew Liaison 2nd Class Kluka called out over the ship intercom. Captain Holketh locked his crash harness in place, and swallowed to lock his esophagus in case one of his 4 stomachs attempted to purge due to jump space shock. How close are we? Captain Holcuth asked, once he and the rest of the bridge crew had recovered from translation sickness. 9 solar units, Kamavar replied. So far, all I can detect is the beacon. There's a significant mass at the beacon, probably due to whatever technology allows them to push a beacon signal into jump space. The beacon appears to be sitting on a large expanse of dark matter shadow, Rectek said, looking up from his screen where the third science officer's data was projected. An odd place to put a beacon. Perhaps they were warning others away due to it being dangerous to them somehow? A logical assumption chain. Log it for investigation, Executor Ledmar said, unbuckling his crash harness so he could stand up. He disliked being held in one spot, unable to move about. He blinked all 6 eyes, a pair at a time, then looked about the bridge. Let us explore. Bring us closer, but be careful, Captain Holka said, earning a nod of approval from the Executor. Continue scans, let me know if there is any change. The hours flowed by slowly, the scout ship approaching the beacon slowly but surely. Less than 1/10 of a solar unit from the beacon, the science and scanning officers went to work. It's coming up now. I'm getting trace energy readings, not much beyond the beacon and what's probably some supporting equipment. Third scanner Scantech Second Class Unira said, leaning back. It's easily detectable across most spectrums, almost as if whoever built it wanted it to be seen. I'm bringing it up now. Captain Holcuth nodded. Bring it up on the screen. The Executor stared at the screen. Bring it up in visual wavelength. It was dark, unlit. The only way to see it was the shadow it cast in front of the stars. Give us a scan view. Keep it low, we don't know if our scanning emissions are dangerous to their people, Third Science Officer ordered. The Scantechs bent to their work. Low-powered lasers and radar flickered over the beacon. In the middle of the scan, it lit up. It immediately reminded Captain Holcuth of a water predator. 12 tentacles hanging down from a wide oval body. The lights emitted by the beacon appeared to be wholly devoted to lighting up the structure. That's a big beacon, Kamavar said. I'm detecting more power readings. It appears to be waking up, the Executor mused. He looked at the crew liaison. Stage 2 alert. Let us hope that it is not some kind of hostile thing. To Holcuth, it looked creepily alive. The tentacles began moving, no longer hanging down, but instead slowly moving into position to act as a skirt at the bottom. Hail it, the Executor ordered the third communications officer. Holcuth looked at his ship readiness readouts. They had weapons, exploring the vast unknown mandated such, and everything was ready and at least performing at 80% capacity. We're getting a response, the communications officer answered. Holcuth looked at his readouts. It was obvious what the response was. Basic numerical binary. Science officers? The Executor asked. It appears to be based on only 2 digits, rather than 6. The second science officer reported. Wait, it shifted. Now it appears to be based on 10 digits, using the 2-digit system to show. It's shifted again, using a base 16. The first science officer looked up. I believe it is automated and attempting to communicate. Holcuth stared at the image. It still looked faintly malevolent. It definitely reminded him of an aquatic predator, and the fact it was sitting in a dark matter shadow, like it was feeding somehow, made his shiver. Let the Omni-translator listen to it then, the Executor said, turning away. He had his rearmost and forward eyes shut, obviously dismissing the object. Captain, from my scans I believe the beacon is roughly 200 solar rotations old. It's been out here, in the darkness between solar systems, for a long time, second scanning officer reported. Perhaps it's a derelict? The Executor hummed to himself. Doubtful. Captain Holcuth just nodded, adding that data to his screens. The Executor moved over to the first science officer. Do we have anything on its composition? The science officer shook his head, his mouth tendrils swaying. No, Executor. We can tell that it is there, but according to scans it is a solid object. The view screen flickered a few times, getting the captain's attention. Nobody brought up it, but he included that in his screen's data. He ordered the third maintenance officer to run a scan on the bridge systems and lean back. Approach slowly. I want to know what this thing is, the captain ordered. The executor coiled his tendrils in disapproval but stayed silent. The strange beacon, 8 tendrils extended out from the sides, lit up to show that it was made of chrome with red and white markings on the tendrils. The screen flickered again, the same with everyone's data screens. Maintenance, what is going on? The executor asked. It appears that the ship's computers have triggered a full diagnostic, the second maintenance officer told the executor. Who ordered such a thing? The executor asked, opening his rearwards facing eyes to stare at Captain Holketh for a long moment. It came from your terminal, Chief Executor, the third maintenance officer stated, his rank too low to worry about the Chief Executor demoting him out of displeasure. That is impossible, the Chief Executor stated. He looked at his terminals, which showed nothing but blank screens. He looked at the first security officer. Well? The first security officer nodded. The third maintenance officer is correct. The command originated from your terminal. Captain Holketh tapped his screen, looked at the results, then tapped again, sending the information to the chief security officer. He triggered a tone, bringing the chief executor's attention to him. Yes, Captain? Can you not see this situation requires the attention of my station? The chief executor said, his mouth tendrils tight with irritation. Perhaps someone is using your terminal, Chief Executor, the captain mused. A glance at his screen showed that the ship diagnostic was complete. After all, you have disabled the security functions for registering your identity before use. Those protocols slow my work, the executor said. I am within my office too. The screen wavered, flashed through the 5 primary colors, then went black. Maintenance, are you running another diagnostic? The chief executor asked, puffing out his prominent jowls. No, Chief, the maintenance officer began saying. There you are. The voice was unfamiliar. On the screen a perfect circle had showed up. Squares opened up, 6 of them, for eyes. 4 nasal slits. A mouth. The bridge went silent, everyone staring at the screen. So, what can I do for you? Repairs? Fuel? Revital? The face asked. Seeing as you are an unregistered race, piloting an unregistered vessel, I cannot offer rearming or hardware updating at this time. After a second the chief executor harumphed, relaxing his tendrils. Who am I speaking to? You may call me Dentis, the circle said. The captain nodded slowly. Dentis was the name of the class of ship that provided repair, resupply, and refueling to fleet ships. The face bounced. I see your name is Seeker of Unknown Spaces. A data window opened up on the screen, showing various elements as well as antimatter. This is what I have to offer. I don't take your energy credits, I have all the energy I need. However, I will trade for any of the substances on this list, the face said. Might I inquire as to your species? The science officer asked. I am a Solarian, the face said. The executor suddenly straightened up, his crests rising aggressively. What is your business out here? The face bounced twice and stopped. Business? I told you. Resupply for any ships that need such, trade if available. The captain stared at the list. Exotic isotopes, dark matter, antimatter, common and rare elements, and surprisingly, new media files of entertainment, education, or technical files that Dentis was not in possession of were all considered trade goods. He noticed that oxygen, nitrogen, carbon, and hydrogen were all priority priced. The first science officer straightened up. May we see your physical form? We are interested in your species. The screen blanked, then showed the beacon. That's me. The station. The entire bridge crew looked at one another. No, your physical body. The first science officer tried. You're looking at it. The screen blanked and the face returned. Captain Holka stared at his data screens, then looked up. Are you an artificial life form? The captain asked. Well, that's rude. We prefer digital artificial sentience. Dentis replied. I personally prefer Solarian. My first taste of electricity came from a soul collector. The entire crew went still. Several of the crew closed their eyes, going perfectly still in hopes of avoiding a predator's gaze. Every time AI races were discovered, it led to war. If we leave your presence, will you let us go in peace? The executor asked. The icon on the screen made a good impression of a frown. Why wouldn't I? You can't trade with someone if you blow them up. The captain relaxed in his chair. No AI civilization had been discovered in centuries, but Dentis seemed less inclined to commit mutual suicide or launch a surprise attack. Do you want to trade or not? Dentis asked. The executor shook his tendrils. Take us into jump space. The science officers complained, but the 4 helm officers took the ship back into jump space, heading back toward the unified civilized systems at the executor's orders. The captain leaned back in his chair as the swirling colors of jump space filled the screen. The executor had given in to his instincts and fled at the first sign of anything threatening that he could not be sure he could obliterate. While an AI in the middle of the emptiness between stars might seem threatening at first, Captain Holketh really couldn't see how it could threaten anyone beyond those who came within reach. It had seemed awfully friendly for an AI. The executor, however, testified to the Unified Exploratory Council that the AI obviously had been abandoned for many years, centuries in fact. Exploration would have to be overseen by the executors and their warships to ensure that any AI encountered could be fended off. Captain Holketh kept his silence and instead began researching the ancient AI wars. Nowhere could he find reference to Solarians or Sol, which meant he had made first contact. And that was enough for him. Initiate data squeal. Hey guys. Listen, I know sometimes you see weird stuff out here, but check this out. Attached data file, some hunk of junk with a badly tuned jump drive dropped on my beacon. As soon as they found out I was AI, they got all weird on me and ran off. Seems like any advanced society wouldn't be so racist against digital sentience, but you know how some people are. Their jump drive was badly tuned and probably operating at only 70% efficiency. They were packing a few plasma guns and what looked like a really bad laser weapon, but nothing modern or with a decent standoff distance. Frankly, from what I saw, I might have mistaken point defense weapons against debris for weapons. Still, I didn't hack into their systems beyond talking to their translator and making sure they could understand me. I'm abiding by my terms of confinement, that's gotta be worth something, right? All those juicy data stores and I didn't slash, cut, or hack a single one. Come on, a couple decades off my sentence? Please? Anyway, guess we've got a first contact here. I want that credited to my account when I get parole. Blackwater Station 4276. P.S. Any chance I get some more of that good stuff out of the clone worlds? Maybe a geisha limited AI? Something? Watching this place is boring. Nothing follows. Confederate Intelligence Memo. CC, Artificial Biological States. Digital Artificial Intelligence Infonet Worlds, Terrasol.gov, Cyborg Cooperative, Clone Directorate, Manted Free Worlds, Trinad Hive Worlds. All core stations, outposts, and colonies should be on alert for any incursions of foreign or previously unknown Xenosapien life. Observe first contact protocols. Nothing follows. Trinad Hive Intelligence. Your last. Coward along the Arm Spur is largely myth and rumor. We would have had to go through your territory to get there, and Hiving saw how well that went. The Great Gulf, according to hiving records, is largely the result of several pre-sapiens species fighting over territory, much like we did, but without the restraint both of our species and allies showed. Seeing as Terrasol's system sits in the horn of the Great Gulf, we at Hiving suggest examining any precursor archaeological digs for hints of what you might encounter. Please be advised, the precursor war, according to our archaeological records, wiped out most life in our local arm spur. Recommendation: proceed with caution. Chapter 2. Slimas limped across the command deck before settling into the captain's cradle. The air still smelled of scorched metal, lubricants, and organic compounds, but the smoke had cleared, meaning that damage control had gotten the fires out and environmental systems somewhat repaired. Slimas coughed, feeling his barking sac swell, pulling at the recently regenerated skin on the side of his neck, then looked around. Most of the original bridge crew was either dead or injured. Nearly a fifth of the ship's crew was dead, a third of the rest in heel sleep or being attended by medicos in the infirmary. The ship, judging by the view screen, was still dead in the water, slowly tumbling on all three axes through the depths of space. The trailing wisp's purple and blue glitter that was slowly leaking into space from the damaged jump space engines gave a spiraling testimony to the face that they were still moving at a decent speed. At least, if they'd been in a solar system. Slimas gave a burbling sigh. They were in between stars. Which meant no chance for help, and any planet that might sustain them until they could repair the ship's engines was too far away to reach in a dozen lifetimes. Of course, a jump-scorched ship wasn't bad enough. Neither was a dead captain and first mate. Of course not. The universe just had to urinate on Slimas's tail, and the tail of everyone on the ship. "It's confirmed, Acting Captain Slimas," the former weapons technician hissed, looking up. "I managed to get a clear picture with an optical camera, but it's not any ship I saw in training." Slimas sighed and looked at the data screens surrounding the captain's cradle. They were all cracked and discolored from the jump scorch. "Throw it on the main screen. I guess we should all see what's come to step on our tails." The weapons technician, so low-ranked he didn't even actually have a name, bobbed his head in submission. The screen, a third of it not working and discolored, wavered for a moment, then showed an image of the ship, concentric sensor rings, and a line that started at a circle a little ways away and was slowly approaching. "It dropped into real space just over 30 cycles ago and immediately headed straight for us. I thought at first they were locking us with weapon ranging systems, but after they started blinking a laser in the low red range at us, I realized they were scanning and then trying to communicate," the weapons tech said. "What do we know about them?" Slimas asked. "Nothing. The dedicated scanners are offline. I pointed one of the docking cameras toward them, but they're too far away. What scanning I can do shows a dead ship approaching. Not even enough power for weapons tracking despite the fact they are scanning us with a low-red laser," the nameless one said. He pointed at a window on the screen that showed a faint glimmering speck. "That's it right there." "And their approach?" Slimas knew the answer, just looking at the screen. "They're pulling extremely high acceleration still. At their current rate of acceleration they'll overshoot us in 6 cycles. At their current rate of speed, if they were to cease acceleration, they'll overtake us in 9 cycles. There's no way any sapient we know of can survive the kind of deceleration that they'll have to undertake in order to slow down to match velocity with us," the weapon technician said. "An attack run?" Slimas asked. The unnamed tech flicked his tail in a motion to signify that anything was possible. "Can we reply? Communicate?" Slimas asked. "Request the right of surrender?" The only other officer on the bridge made a sign of negation. "No, Acting High One. With the power plant damaged and our computer systems damaged, we cannot spare the power or the computing cycles from repair, life support, and medical to attempt to contact them. Alert the crew. Sing our death songs. I will pray to the Forgotten Ones that they are not here to attack us, but let our souls be prepared," Slimas said. The other two officers looked grateful and left the bridge to return to their quarters to sing their death songs and perform death rites. Slimas sat and watched the steadily approaching dot. He had nothing else to do. Slimas watched the alien ship get closer. After 5 cycles it had suddenly decelerated as if it had began sliding on thick syrup. The twinkle had grown steadily larger as the alien ship approached, until now, almost a full cycle after it had begun to slow down, he could see plenty of details. Whoever made it didn't care about aesthetics. It was anodized black, with protrusions and a thick hammerhead foredeck. It had 4 massive engines held away from the craft by swooping struts, the engines glowing and thrumming with such power that Slimas could swear he felt in his bones. Whoever had built that craft had made sure it was constructed to deliver a simple message. "We don't like you, we don't like your burrow, and we don't like your eggs." He'd ordered the nameless one, who he'd begun referring to as Slinner in his own mind, to switch off any kind of targeting system and to only observe it through the visible spectrum. "I thought you said it didn't have power." The communications officer snapped at Slinner, growling and flaring his ruffles. "I can see light coming from it. We can detect that, but no power aside from that, and my instruments claimed it was stellar light reflecting off of debris." Slinner answered. "Then you are as stupid as your instruments." The communications officer snarled. "Easy, easy. He can only tell us what his instruments can detect," Slimas said. "The engines produce no power I could detect. The ship itself radiates no power. According to the instruments, before I switch them off, there is nothing there despite what our eyes see," Slinner replied, staying unruffled. "We can see the lights from it," the communication officer snarled. Slimas had begun thinking of his as Snapjaw and wished there was someone else who could run the communications software. "And my instruments, except for that camera, do not see the lights. Must I record that statement and play it on a loop for you to understand?" Slinner asked. "That is impossible. Are you incompetent?" Snapjaw started to rant. "You're blinky," Slinner suddenly said, pointing at Snapjaw's data displays. Snapjaw turned back to his display, frowning. It was an incoming communication request and an incoming data link request. Snapjaw hissed his frustration, working the unfamiliar menus until finally the lights stopped blinking. Slimas sighed, a rattling sound in his throat, and swiped the icons on his screen to bring up the communication window on what was left of the main view screen, replacing the concentric rings that merely showed that the foreign ship was practically on top Slimas's inherited vessel. The screen flickered and showed the image of, at first glance, what looked to be some kind of bipedal construction robot. It took Slimas a second to realize that it wasn't a robot but rather some kind of armored vac suit. "Jump drive failure, huh?" the figure asked in perfect Haitianish. Captioning ran across the bottom, and in the upper right there was an image of his own ship with the drive exploding and a query mark over it. "Affirmative," Slimas answered. "I'm going to skin you." "Is that permissible?" the armored vac-suited figure asked. "Affirmative," Slimas answered. "Stay on the image. I want to make sure I don't boil you alive or something," the figure said. "Man, it's been a long time since I dealt with the living. Hang on." Slimas expected the scan to take a long time, but it was less than a few breaths before the figure suddenly started moving again. "You've got a damaged jump core, your computer system is electromag shocked, you've got structural damage and a lot more," the voice said. Slimas found it odd to not be able to see the other sapient's face, but was willing to ignore that if this sapient was willing to help his injured crew. He just nodded, and the figure nodded its head. "All right, I can get you going again." There was silence for a long time, and the figure made a mechanical sighing noise. "You have to invite me on board, those are the rules," it said. Slimas nodded. "I invite you, strange one, onto my humble vessel." The figure nodded back and cut the image. It was bigger than Slimas had thought it would be. It moved mechanically, its joints hissed and purred, he could hear it using sonar and high frequency. Its body seemed to be full of machinery and tools. It had a quadruped following it, some kind of industrial robot with 4 legs and a strange-looking head that often made weird sharp staccato noises. For nearly 14 cycles it worked tirelessly. Slimas learned that the quadruped robot was called Fido, and that the figure was called Dashin, in its own tongue. At one point Slimas approached the figure, who had just exited the jump core, slapping its hands together. "Are you artificial?" Slimas asked. The figure shook its head. "Nope. Clinically immortal but originally biological," it said. Slimas pondered that answer for several cycles, unable to come to grips with what it might mean. "All right. This should get you back home. I took the liberty of checking your astrogation files for the closest system. You're lost by about 12,000 light years, but you should be all right now that your jump drive is tuned," Dashin told Slimas at the airlock. "You've got food, water, and enough power to get back, but not much more." "What caused it?" Slimas asked. "Jump space rapids. They must have shifted since the last time you surveyed that section of jump space. I'd have your government run probes on all the major shipping lines," Dashin said. "I put my estimations and data on a file." Dashin paused halfway out the lock. Slimas had gotten used to how Dashin would just exit the lock, use a reactionless drive to move back to his own ship, and then return as if space was his natural element. "Look, Acting Captain Slimas, it's either you hit what my people call rapids or—" He squatted slightly and put his helmet near Slimas's ear. "Or sabotage." He straightened back up. "Anyway, good luck. Try not to let anyone step on your tail, all right?" "Wait," Slimas asked. "I have one request." "Sure, my scaly brother. Ask away," Dashin said. "May I see your face? So the crew and I may pray to the Forgotten Ones for you properly?" Slimas asked. "Not a good plan, my friend," Dashin said. "You said you are alive?" "My religion and beliefs." Slimas started. "All right, since it's your religion. Remember, my scaly friend, you asked for it," Dashin said. The faceplate opened and Slimas found himself staring at horror. Liquid bubbled in a duraglass tank. Inside, a lower mandible floated beneath a pair of blue eyes that were attached via the optic nerves to thickly furrowed cerebral tissue that was embedded with electronics and wires, all of it floating in the tank. Slimas rapidly inflated and deflated his barking sac to keep from fainting as the plates closed at the front of the helmet. He heard Fido make those same noises and looked down, to see the armored plate had retracted, showing the same horror inside Fido's head, only the mandible longer and sporting conical teeth. The plate closed. "You asked, buddy," Dashin said. "Let's go, Fido." Slimas watched as the thing cycled the lock and left. He staggered to the bridge, the appearance of his crew's benefactor burned into his mind. He collapsed into the captain's cradle and stared at the view screen. "He's hailing us," Snapjaw said. "Put it on," Slimas said. The armored figure appeared again. Now that the screen had been repaired, he could see Fido was folded up in the wall behind him, the head detached and sitting nearby. "I'm gonna go slow till I'm away from you. You guys go ahead and go first. I'll tag for a ways in jump space, then head on out, all right?" Dashin asked. Slimas bobbed his head. Before the feed could be cut, Slimas slapped his tail, almost wincing as he got Dashin's attention. When he realized he had the alien's attention, he asked the question that had been bothering since the airlock. Why do you keep the jawbone in eyes?" he asked. "Because it's funny." Slimas testified to the Unified Exploratory Council that the creature he had encountered has claimed to be clinically immortal, and had required permission to board, working without any apparent rest. The council met for an emergency meeting. 2 separate species being encountered in the same rough region, deep in the dead zone, within the same time frame of a handful of great cycles, was cause for alarm. If there were 2 xenospecies, there could be more. From Dashing Freeborn. 2. Confederacy. Encountered a new Xenosapient in need of assistance. Rendered assistance according to the clinically immortal code of conduct. Repaired their vessel and sent them on their way. Attached is a financial statement of the remuneration due to my descendants for providing this aid as a representative of the Terran Confederacy. Attached is schematics for a light frigate of a previously unknown Xenosapient. Also attached is medical data gleaned from the ship's own computers. Attached is a copy of their library core. Copying information in such a matter is permissible under the clinically immortal code of conduct. I haven't really gone over the data files because, honestly, I don't care. The captain seemed nice. Try not to glass his planet, or something stupid like that. No reply is required. Just leave me alone. Nothing follows in my footsteps. From Fido Freeborn. 2. Confederacy. They were lizards. I don't like lizards. A lizard bit my foot when I was still squishy. New lizards did not bite my foot. Dashing is still good boy. Fido is still good ba. We hunt further in the dark. Nothing follows. Chapter 3. Captain Delminta was enjoying a cup of stim on the bridge. The star system she was exploring had been a bust. She had wasted credits and contacts and favors to survey and then explode a system that turned out to be worse than abandoned. 2 dwarf yellow stars in tandem, 19 planets including 8 gas giants, 8 asteroid belts, and a bean-shaped Oort cloud. 116 light-years beyond the border of the rim worlds, 143 LY beyond the nearest civilized system. According to the Historical Astrogation Society, the system had never even been surveyed. The recent change in jump space currents had turned the 8-year travel into one that only took 6 weeks. Delminta had leveraged her fortune, in money and favors, to lay her hands on a survey ship and the rights to survey and exploit the system. Only it had been visited before. Nearly 100 million years ago. On the 3 worlds that still had geological movement and continental drift, all the evidence was gone. It was the other worlds that bore mute testimony to what had happened. The Precursor War. Which meant 2 things: any easily extracted minerals would be gone. Worse is that it was too close to the Great Gulf, where the Precursor War between 2 ancient civilizations had wiped out life across the Galactic Arm Spur. Some even said that the Precursor War is why the arm was a spur, that the very suns had been extinguished. Not that Captain Delminta believed that kind of mumbo-jumbo nonsense. She smoothed some fur as she watched the probe crest the horizon. Hers were a tree-dwelling people, mammalian, with soft fur, delicate ears, large eyes, and strong grips. Her natural instincts for geometry made her a good captain, and made her crew highly skilled even in null grav. She took another drink of stim and curled her toes, cracking the joints. It was at that moment the alarms for one of her probe networks went off, startling her. She jumped, throwing her heated stim juice all over the back of her navigator, who woke up from his nap screeching. He smacked the communications officer, who woke up, snarled, and kicked the science officer, who promptly kicked Delminta in the shin, just like the little brat of a cousin had done when they were children. By the time the bridge was settled down, the geosynchronous satellite survey net over the tiny gas planet was screaming a promixity alert so bad it made Delminta roll her ears and smack her baby sister, the communications officer, with her command stick. "What is its problem?" Delminta barked at her baby sister. Himina bit Delminta's foot, then turned back to her instruments. "There's something big out there. It's moving toward us. It's real close. Like, in orbit around this gas planet close." Delminta suddenly thought of all the stories of precursor death machines lurking out in the darkness ready to swoop down and destroy any colonists who dared get too close the long night when establishing their colonies. "Can you give me a look at it?" she asked her aunt, narrowly managing to turn her head so her aunt poked her cheek instead of her eye. "I'll give you a look of something," her aunt said. Then turned back to the instrument panel. "It's talking too." Delminta knew her family didn't mean any of it. It was just, on the survey ship for so long, they were unable to take out their aggression in any other method, so everyone had resorted to pinches, pokes, slaps, bites, and kicks. "Coming in, now," Aunt Beta said, then mumbled about how back in her day, when the main viewer lit up, everyone screamed and fought one another to flee the bridge. Delminta caught a nasty elbow to the eye when her nephew kneed her in the groin and her baby brother elbowed her out of the way. After a few minutes it was decided that since this was all Delminta's idea and she was captain, she could go back onto the bridge. So they promptly shoved her onto the bridge and shut the door. Delminta stared in shock at the screen. It was huge and looked like the tiny little scavengers in the warm seas of her home world. A bell-like top with a multitude of tentacles hanging down. It was lit up, blue light outlining it and filling it with bright spots appearing and disappearing of pink, green, red, and orange. "Hello? Hello? Are you guys in there?" a feminine voice asked. Delminta stared in shock. "Hey, can you hear me?" One tendril lifted up and tapped the side of the bell. "Stupid Gentrix Industries calm nerves. Shoulda got a warranty." Delminta swallowed and looked up at the blast door window. She could see 3 of her cousins, her left-hand brood mother, and an aunt looking at her through the window. Her left-hand brood mother waved at her to get it on. Yes, I can hear you," Delminta said. The whole thing rippled with color, and several of the long tendrils, which the ship estimated to be hundreds miles long and miles thick, trembled as if in pleasure. "Oh, wow. Hot pipe, baby. I thought I'd gone deaf," the feminine voice said. "Sandy Tamerlan, nice to meet you." One of the tendrils started to extend, then jerked back when Delminta screamed. "Oh, sorry, not used to this yet. Wow, how embarrassing. So, who are you?" The last was said in a steady, even tone, the slightly silly, almost younger sibling-sounding tone vanishing. "Captain Delminta, of the Swift Grass clan, of the Singing Spires Forest, of Hamarusa," Delminta said. "Wow, that sound neat. Hey, anyway, is this yours?" the voice asked. The tentacles pointed at the gas planet. It's a planetoid." "Yeah, well, I'm kinda hungry. I mean, do you live there of something? My nerves can't detect any structures or life forms in there, and it is made up of helium, hydrogen, delicious methane, and a lot of H20. I mean, do you mind?" The voice had gone from somewhat mature to childish wheedling. "You want to eat the gas planet?" Delminta asked. "Psst, let her. It's a gas planet. Nobody cares." Several of her aunts whispered at her over the communicator. "I'm hungry. It was a long trip. Nobody told me how hard it was to swim through hyperspace when I bought the hyperglands, the pump sacks, and the squirter," the feminine voice said. "I'm just on my way to the triquasar cluster. A bunch of us are getting together and gonna make the electron clouds around the quasars sing." "Sure. Go ahead," Delminta said. "Thanks, Spanky, you're the best." Helium." The tentacles dropped down and the voice went silent. "Is it going to eat us?" Beta asked through the crack at the door. "No. I think it's a she, is just eating from the gas giant," Delminta said. "Ask where it's from so we can avoid it," her right-hand brood mother said. Sandy?" Delminta said. "Yeah?" The feminine voice came back. "Where are you from?" Delminta asked. "Oh. Yeah. How rude. You told me." "Well, I guess I'm from the city of Chicago, Sol System," Sandy answered. "Oh, hydrocarbon pocket. Delicious hydrocarbons. I'm a Solarian." "Oh," Delminta said, looking at the huge jellyfish. Its color was brightening. "Well, Delminta of the Sunny Spires Ponderosa, it was nice to meet you, but I'm kinda late," Sandy suddenly said. Delminta noticed the voice was refreshed and the tentacles were retracting into the bottom of the bell. "Wait!" Delminta cried out. She flinched as the bell tilted toward her little ship. Yeah? The voice definitely sounded like a little girl's, and Delminta wondered how much of it was the ship's computer trying to make it so the massive creature wasn't so panic-inducing. Out of politeness, we show each other how we look, Delminta said. Oh, is that why you let me see you? You're so cute. Kind of like a sugar glider and a kitty and squirrel all mixed together. My friends are going to love hearing about you, the jellyfish said. And you? Delminta asked. Oh, this is me. It's custom. Daddy bought it for me. I'm a registered biosynth now, but that's okay, the voice said. Well, bouquet, bye. There was a weird eye-watering flash, and Delminta thought for a second that it looked like the giant jellyfish suddenly inverted. As soon as the jellyfish vanished, her family rushed in, kicking, biting, pinching, all fighting to get at their controls and tried to get instrumentation on the creature that had just vanished. Personally, Delminta was wondering if maybe she could sell the data to the Unified Exploratory Council and come out even. The Unified Exploratory Council purchased Delminta's logs, the recordings causing furious debate among the council. Normally nobody would believe a crew as flighty as a crew of Hamarusans that they'd encountered a sentient jellyfish that fed off of gas planets. But this was the third, maybe even the fourth, sole sentient species that had been discovered. Leading the Exploratory Council one question. What exactly was soul? Daddy? Look at these squirrels. I want to be one of those when I come home. Please, 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 please. I'll be back in 5 years. I want to be a squirrel. I'll take really good care of this body so it gets a good trade-in. I never get to be anything cute. Please. 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 I love you, Daddy. Sandy. Chapter 4. Tubaven was dying. It had never been healthy. It had been a risk, a chance taken by scientists looking for answers that had already been discovered centuries before. It was nicknamed the Asylum by more established scientists, and even the Unified Scientific Council listed Tubaven as the Asylum in official records now and then. The planet had old precursor ruins on it. Even with a dead core, there had still been earthquakes. The atmosphere and ecosystem had destroyed what the earthquakes left behind. It was the ecosystem that fascinated the scientists. That a mere 100 million years after being raised to dust and boiled seas, life had returned. Life like the scientists. Familiar life. The civilized races, like all the living, required several things to remain healthy and part of the living. The planet that Tubaven orbited normally provided those things. Then the comet hit. Normally, this would not have caused Tubaven too much trouble. After all, it was a society of scientists, even if their peers considered them crackpots. Except that budget shortfalls had meant the shuttles had not all been repaired, and when the comet had hit, it had destroyed the extraction fabrication units, and the only usable shuttle. Along with 5 of the scientists. Tubaven was dying the second the plasma shockwave from the comet hitting the planet began to ripple into the atmosphere. The scientists had watched in horror as the ecosystem they had been studying, not finding any new answers to any of the old questions, but studying all the same, died to a comet of methane, carbon dioxide, ammonia, carbon monoxide, hydrogen, and oxygen. 5 scientists lost hope, dying, as the atmosphere burned, the oceans boiled, and the ecosystem was reduced to memories and recordings. The Galcom no longer worked. The geothermal power plant no longer beamed up power, and the solar array had been blasted apart when the comet had struck it. That meant nobody was going to hear the remaining scientists' cries for help. One by one the scientists left the mortal coil. Each taking their lives privately, quietly, many hoping their demise would allow the environmental systems to last a bit longer for their fellows. Even those who devote their lives to science care for others. Each missed meal was a battle. Each gasping breath was a skirmish. Each dehydrated swallow was a blade stroke. But those that could held on. dutifully recording what they went through even though the science of the dying brought no answers to the old questions. They were ready to die, prepared for it. After all, it was basic science. Tubaven was dying, and when it died, they would too. Shah Khan knew this. Knew this as well as he knew his own death song, which he had sung in the privacy of his chambers. Knew it as well as he knew the sound his own barking sack made. Knew it as well as he remembered his mate's scale pattern on her tail, left behind on beautiful Argasa. Still, science gave hope. Which is why he was hooked into the jump beacon, trying to repair it. They had been sending a signal when the communications array had been destroyed, and since then it kept repeating the same signal over and over. 3 short bursts, 3 long bursts. Over and over. The incoming buffer was unresponsive. He could laze it. He could ping it. But it couldn't hear him. 3 short. 3 long. Over and over into jump space. To top it off, it wasn't even pointed back at the civilized worlds. It was pointed deeper into the great empty of the precursor war. 3 short. 3 long. Shah Khan was about to disconnect from Tubaven's systems when he saw it. A sparkle. A weird sparkle. High particle energy sleeting from empty space. On the sensor array he could still access it. Appeared as if someone was lighting fireworks off in empty space. Multicolored streamers, sparkles, and even electron cascades. Shah Khan was looking right at it when it happened. Space went, well, blue. Right in the middle of the sparkle. It went white to the sensor array, then back to black. Blaring sound came over the sensor array, gibberish, but mathematical. Musical? A signal reached out to Tubaven and nudged it. Once. Twice. 3 times. Then Shah Khan saw it. A massive ship. Shaped like a slightly flattened egg, or a seed, with blisters and bubbles all over it. Large enough that Tubaven could fit inside easily. The engine propelled it toward Tubaven and the craft kept signaling. I have nothing to lose, Shah Khan thought. He opened the buffers and allowed the signal to communicate with Tubaven's dying mainframe. It took him a second to realize what was loaded from the other vessel. Pictures. Basic math. Advanced math. A lexicon? Shah Khan engaged the remaining lobes of the mainframe, shunting as much of the liquid helium as could be spared and letting them grind through the data. It took less than 1/10 of a cycle before the strange ugly ship had gotten halfway to Tubaven. 2 of the lobes gave up their electronic lives, but it was done. Shah Khan would be able to talk to them. Praying to the forgotten ones, Shah Khan opened a communication channel. The screen popped up, showing a short, squat, almost dumpy-looking hairless primate sitting in a furry reclining couch. Streamers and coins poured down around him and cartoon animals frolicked across the bottom of the screen. Never fear, Maxio Ngyn here, the primate cried out. All of the cartoon animals jumped and squealed. I got your distress call, buddy. I'm on my way. Hang tight. 30 mics and I'll be knock. Shah Khan quailed slightly at the disruptive and unorthodox communication, but he was too weak to protest. He merely opened his side, allowing his camera to show him. Situation desperate, Shah Khan said. Holy crap! A lizard dude! The primate seemed excited, or at least Shah Khan guessed it was excitement. It was hard to tell with primates. First contact, baby! Maxio Ngyn with the SCOR. Seeing as you're a new customer, play some slots, see what you win. Hell, you can have the winner wheels since you're in distress, baby. Maxio Ngyn is the firstest with the mostest and the traitest. The screen suddenly had 3 wheels overlaying Max, and a button at the bottom that said, Every press a winner. Curious, tired, and frankly glad for the distraction, Shah Khan pressed the button. The wheels spun, the little cartoon animals capered, and the wheels settled on 3 drops of water. You win! 20 liters of water! Winner! Shah Khan frowned. Gambling? Now? Then he realized it was a distraction from dying. There's no way the primate could help him. There were only 2 other primates in the civilized races, and both of them could barely pilot a scout ship. Soon Shah Khan had forgotten his depression, completely entranced by the gambling wheels, the little cartoons, the bouncing singing cartoon animals, and the fact that he just kept winning. Suddenly the wheels vanished, and the primate was there. He was dressed in some kind of cloth, or maybe armor, that shimmered and sparkled and showed off rainbow color. He had a clear face shield on, and Shah Khan realized that the suit kept spelling out, Max A Millions! Registered and bonded junkman and trader! NGY Junker LLC! In a scrolling pattern down the arms and legs. It was an upright biped. Hey baby, you still okay? The primate Max asked. Yes. I am here. My scanners show there's about 24 of you left. Ouch. Your station has habs for 60. My condolences, baby. That qualifies you for a bereavement and grief discount, by law, and Max will totally hook you up. Hey, do you breathe oxygen? Max asked. Yes, we can, Shah Khan answered. Phew, good. Nitrogen makes my ears tingle and ammonia smells like total ass, baby. Anyway, can I come in? You kind of have to invite me, Max said. Yes, you may enter our station. It is badly damaged, so be cautious, Shah Khan warned. Hey, I'm gonna need access to your medical computers. You guys probably need food, stuff to drink, your Atmo fixed right up. I mean, no offense, my big lizard friend, but you look like a bag of cat assholes, Max said. Shah Khan set the computer to allow Max's computers to integrate, surprised that the primate's computers would be so adept at it. All right, buddy. Yeah, I see what you need. Phew, you got your ass kicked. All right, 9 different races, all different dietary requirements. Well, good thing for you I'm all loaded up. I'll be right over with some repair bots and we'll fix you right up, Max said. He made a motion where he thrust his fist in the air. First contact, baby! Max with the firstest. Shah Khan just nodded weakly. Less than a cycle later the computer reported light impacts at the airlock and Max's voice came over the intercom. Yo, lizard buddy, me and the Grendels, we got you some food. I gotta get a look at your stuff if I'm gonna repair it, Max said. Can I come in? Yes, Shah Khan said, getting up. I will meet you at the airlock. Shah Khan was curious to see what a Grendel was. He made his way slowly and stiffly to the airlock, his joints aching and stiff from lack of food. His tail was a thin thing, bone and sinew, no fat stores, and he felt slightly ashamed at the dullness of his scales. When the airlock cycled, Shah Khan was startled to see that a long plastic tube connected the 2 ships. Max stood in front of a good dozen robots, all of which were carrying boxes. Max's suit kept showing patterns, cute cartoon animals, and the script over and over. Max Yo NGY aka Max A Millions, at your service, the primate said, baring its teeth. Shah Khan just nodded, weakly waving at the human to follow. All right, boys, do it like I told ya. Check the damaged shit, see what's compatible with the replacement parts we have, see what has to be replaced. We'll need to repair those tanks on the hull, replenish the atmosphere, and help these people out, Max said to the robots. He moved aside so they could go by. Shah Khan noticed they were all painted vivid colors, with cartoons on the side, and all beeped out happy musical tunes, some of which he recognized from his own childhood. Yeah, I used your guys' tunes. Didn't know if Happy Happy Joy Joy would sound like the Imperial Death March to you guys or something. I didn't screw up the oral range, did I? Max asked. Shah Khan shook his head, slumping slightly. Whoa there, champ. Here, have a free drink on Max. Never let it said a junker was cheap. Max handed Shah Khan a squeeze bottle with a straw. Nervously, Shah Khan put the straw in his mouth and squeezed the bottle. What was it going to do, kill him faster? The liquid was sweet, full of nutrients and other things that Shah Khan had lost during his long hunger. He greedily squeezed it twice more and was disappointed when it was empty on the third squeeze. Max had one hand pressed to his ear, listening. He looked at Shah Khan, who was feeling better as electrolytes flooded his system. You're in trouble, buddy. But by Confederate legal code, any research station or civilian ship broadcasting a distress code must be rendered due assistance, Max said, looking serious. Do you require assistance? Shah Khan nodded. I'll take that as an affirmative. All right, metalheads, get to work, let's help these guys out, Max said. He looked down. Let's find somewhere comfortable while the metalheads get to work. You can collect your winnings, then we'll get down to trade. Shah Khan couldn't believe that he was actually going to receive what he'd won, playing the game. He had thought Max had just used that to distract him. Instead, Max sat down and set a hollow projector on the table. You're in luck, Shikakan. Old Max just finished a salvage operation on an old Austin-class superdreadnought out at the Tannhauser Gate or Cloud. Lots of salvage out there if you're a junkman like Max here. Max grinned. I'll fix you up free of charge, but I get the junk. Then we'll get down to some serious trading. 8 cycles later, Max messaged Shah Khan from his ship. The primate, which Shah Khan had learned was a Terran from the Sol system, waved happily from his recliner. Shah Khan had learned that Max's people were like any other people. Some exuberant like Max, others cautious like Shah Khan. Pure strain humans they called themselves. Good trading with you, Shaky. I'll swing back by in about, say, 200 of your cycles with more stuff to trade. Sound good? Max asked. His suit was silver and had small cartoon human children chasing each other and smacking each other with blunt objects. Max's race found physical violence comedic. Sounds good, Maximum Max, Shah Khan said. Cat Cha on the flip side, my scaly brother from another mother, the human answered. The shit was gone with a tinkle and a spray of fireworks. Hulivar, a Kivian avian scientist, looked into the room. Is it gone? She asked. Shah Khan nodded. The primate had alarmed the rest of the station's surviving scientists, and they'd hidden out in their rooms the entire time Max's, Grendel, robots had repaired the station and made upgrades. Oh, well, good. We'll contact the Unified Science Council and have them send someone to take us home, Hulivar trilled. Let someone else examine this destroyed world if they want. I for one cannot wait to return home. I think I may be done being a scientist. The avian bobbed out of the room, ruffling her feathers. But Shah Khan didn't pay attention. He'd opened up a data file and began typing. Max the Human and his amazing junk show. Shah Khan's scientific paper addressed a new question that the Unified Exploration Council and new questions that the Unified Science Councils were seeking answers for. It caused great alarm, but the recorded video interviews could not be denied. That added another race to the Solarians. The Terrans. And another. Pure strain humans. Sol was revealed to be a solar system. Off that way, toward the tip of the arm spur deep in the precursor zone. 6 races. All wildly different. From the same system. The Unified Council was concerned. Confederate intelligence memo. Discovered a distress signal broadcast by a damaged jump space beacon. Accidentally used universal distress code. Arrived and gave assistance, as required by Junker code. Replaced unknown Xenascension equipment with Terrasol equipment circa First Artificial War, CUSN Calcutta, destination Battle of Tannhauser Gate, to acquire both damaged and outdated Xenotech. Copied entire contents of mainframe, performed interviews of races. Unified civilized races. Contained 16 Xenosapient species. AM returning to outbound station in Sol or Cloud. Expect full debriefing. Nothing follows. Chapter 5. Cheeky Longflight stared at the scanners and clicked her beak in frustration and grief as she stared at the screens, which painted everything in lurid colors. Ruffling her feathers, she willed the screens to change. They didn't. Her species could see 5 primary colors. Her hearing was more sensitive than that of all but 2 of the unified civilized races, despite having rejected membership in that august body. Her people were one of the ununified races, rarely considered civilized by the rest of the races, but outside of the ever-present rules and laws and regulations of that eons-old organization. But that didn't help. In up to 150% of standard gravity she could fly, unfettered by Earth, for miles at a time. Her people had taken to space and exploration as a natural extension of their own abilities, their hollow bones and unique muscle structure quickly adaptable to null-grav and microgravity. But that didn't change anything. Her people, the Akaltak, did not worry about such things as the precursors. Those eggs were smashed. Why worry about them? It was like worrying about last year's wind. You should know about it, but it didn't affect today's flights. They were not afraid of what some called the long dark, others called the great void, and still others called the great empty. They had explored it in the 3 centuries since they had obtained FTL, established colonies, and explored the worlds with what other races called reckless abandon. Which is why things were what they were. Precursor ruins were examined, resulting in the knowledge that those nests were empty and abandoned. Not even bones remained, much less anything useful or enlightening. The ruins were exactly that because of warfare. Akaltak understood struggles over nesting grounds, which made it so that the precursor ruins intrigued them. What would make 2 starfaring civilizations completely destroy one another to the point where nobody had even found remains, fossilized or not? This planet, this dead world, had extensive ruins in the sand and rock. The atmosphere was able to support life, able to allow the Akaltak to fly, and was rich in oxygen. Which is why things were burning. The ruins had been interesting. Evidence of ground fighting, orbital strikes, of terrible weapons being used at Cheekheat Long Flight, and the Long Flight clan had eagerly gone over, hoping to glean knowledge from the evidence of the weapons. They had not reacted in superstitious fear like the other civilized races to the old breezes of a forgotten nest fight. Which is why her clan was dying. Almost 100 years of exploration, expanding the colony, the Long Flight clan budding off into 5 other clans. The population moving from 2,000 to nearly 500,000. Then the discovery. Rock had been turned molten, covering the discovery, concealing it until 100 million years of wind and dust storms had exposed it to the Long Flight clan sensors. They had examined it, slowly excavated it as they recorded and examined it. Strange, advanced alloys, unknown construction. The entire Long Flight clan had rejoiced. They had found an intact precursor artifact. Which is why Cheekheat had watched her people die. It had suddenly activated, come to mechanical life, and set out to destroy all life on the planet. Cheekheat had managed to load precious eggs and chicks into a shuttle, had managed to reach one of the stations, and now watched her people die. Cheekheat Deep Swoop was sitting at the communication station, normally used to file reports, talk to family, or watch the Galnet news. Her feathers drooped with despair as she repeated the request for help from someone, anyone. But they were halfway into the great empty, and there was no way help could reach them in time. Hi Nest 6, are you in need of assistance? The voice was translated by the Omni-translator, changed by the computer into the language of the avian Akaltak, but even so, the calm confidence in the voice came across electronic translation. By the great egg, yes. Oh, those that soar, we are all dying. Cheekheat wailed into the communicator. Her professionalism was gone, burned away like the feathers of all of the warrior caste who had tried to stop the rampaging machine. May I assist you? The voice asked. Cheekheat checked her scanners. There was one energy source, coming in fast, nearly at light speed, but her scanners could not detect a ship. Please! Please help us! There are still eggs, chicks, and moldlings down there! It's killing them all! Cheekheat cried out. Help us, stranger! Then you have invited me in and I may assist, the voice said. Cheeky checked quickly. The voice was coming across the Galnet's superliminal communications array, somehow speaking across a wavelength that normally required huge arrays. Yet she could not find a ship on her scanners, just that energy signature, bright enough to be a huge colony ship. Cheeky watched as the energy source came streaking at the planet, and she cringed, hoping that the being offering assistance wasn't going to help by slamming into the planet at nearly light speed. Instead, it suddenly stopped in a flare of inertia and kinetic energy being dumped into jump space as if a battle cruiser had just lit off its engines. Cheeky focused her scanners, eager to see their possible savior, putting it up on the main screen to replace the horror of what was happening on the surface. Everyone trilled in shock. They had expected a ship. Perhaps a battle cruiser full of drop troops. Maybe even a light attack craft willing to enter atmosphere to engage the machine. Instead, it was a bipedal figure, positioned as if they were standing on an unseen platform, upper limbs crossed across their chest. A long piece of material, perhaps even cloth, rippled behind the figure as if it was in wind despite the impossibility of such a thing in space. It was dressed in red and blue, one arm mechanical, one leg mechanical, and one half of its face obviously robotic. Yet exposed skin was visible on the face, one hand, half the neck. Cheeky chirped softly in confusion. Perhaps its flesh wasn't affected adversely to vacuum? Still, seeing an eye blink, she wondered how that worked, how the figure could even see. She glanced at her scanners and was startled. The energy signal was greater than she'd seen on anything outside of a major metropolis on one of the core worlds. "I'll stop this evildoer," the voice said, and Cheeky's eyes widened as she realized the figure's lips moved. It was some kind of primate, melded to mechanical robotic parts. As she watched, a panel opened up in the figure's leg, disgorging some kind of machines that took up positions around the figure at various distances. "Those things are broadcasting. They want to know if we wish to view the broadcast," Kiktik said. "Yes. Log the transmissions," Cheeky said. Kiktik fluttered her feathers in acknowledgement. The figure suddenly moved, faster than the speed of sound, somehow leaving a blue and red streak behind itself even though Cheeky could detect no reason for it. Cheeky set the scanners to follow it, to watch it. "It can't win by itself," Ekreek said, using the peeps of a molting chick rather than the authoritative clicks and chirps of an adult, as she had since the slaughter had reached its crescendo on the planet. Cheeky's scanners followed the figure as it swooped down on the closest fight. There were 12 of the lesser mechanicals moving in on a nesting area, rushing up on the defenders and ripping them apart with mandibles and blades, almost seeming to relish in the slaughter. The new being landed in the middle of the battlefield, dust raising up from where it had crashed to Earth. Cheeky'd expected to see a huge crater, but instead the figure was just kneeling on the dirt. The broadcast devices swooped down to get the best views from different angles and distances. One of her monitors reported that a massive amount of kinetic energy had been dumped in jump space. The figure stood up and surveyed the scene calmly. Energy in the high red visible spectrum lashed from its eyes. Despite the attempt by Cheeky's people to use laser weaponry to no avail, these beams blew huge chunks from the robotic killer's armor, severed limbs, and whenever the beams touched something vital, caused explosions. In less than 10 seconds all 12 robots were destroyed and the being took to flight, one limb extended in front of them, the broadcast devices keeping up. After the third combat against the artifacts manufactured minions, Cheeky noticed something odd. Something that tickled at her like a loose feather. The being, which was no taller than Cheeky, made sure that Cheeky had the best scanner view. She shifted one of the satellites to check, and the being shifted its lines of attack in order to give Cheeky the best view. "Is it ensuring that I can record and document its actions?" Cheeky wondered. The battle against the artifact took the longest, and was obviously the hardest for the half-mechanical creature. Several times the being's clothing was torn and damaged, and she saw bruises appear on the flesh. She saw the mechanical parts on the being get damaged. Every time a broadcast drone was destroyed, another was deployed. Twice she saw the being's skin get cut and blood flow. The broadcast drones focused in on those wounds, replaying the blow that caused them. Finally, the artifact collapsed and the being was thrown back by the explosion caused by what was obviously the artifact's self-destruct. The figure laid on the broken glass for a long moment, then got up, wiping the biological part of its mouth with one upper forelimb. It looked up, to Cheekit's view straight into the camera of the satellite, made an odd expression, then launched itself towards space. It should have left a crater, taking off like that from the ground and no built-up momentum. Again, her instruments showed a massive energy dump into jump space. The figure stopped suddenly, as if the laws of inertia were something the figure could just ignore. Again, the figure had its upper limbs across its chest, lower limbs pressed together, as if it was standing on an invisible platform. The cloth was missing, torn free during the fierce battle on the planet. "You should be safe now," the figure said across the Galnet link. "I'll leave a league buoy in case you run into trouble later. Don't worry, it will be monitored. Our thanks to you, stranger. Do you require assistance? You appear injured," Kik said, wondering how they'd repair the figure's robotic parts, much less flesh that could withstand point-blank plasma bursts without even discoloration. "I'll be fine, citizen," the figure said. "Might we know your name, stranger?" Kik asked. "We are the Long Flight clan of the Aklatak people." "Clark Khan," the figure smiled. "May we know where you are from?" Kik asked. "We are from this planet, but originally we are from the Feathered Nebula cluster." "So, my friends. I'm a Solarian, originally from Krypton." The figure smiled and made a sweeping gesture to encompass further into the great entity. "How may we reward you, Clark of the Kant clan?" Kik asked. "No reward is necessary, friends," the figure said. "One of Terrasol's greatest heroes is always willing to help out those in need." It touched two fingers to its brow, and was gone. Cheekit looked at her scanners. The figure was rapidly accelerating, too fast for even major capital ships to withstand without the inertia crushing the ship to debris. Right when it reached the speed of light, there was a rippling glitter, and the figure was gone in a flash of blue and red then white light. They were safe, their nestmates on the planet were safe. And the being had recorded every iota, every microsecond, every joule of the fight, uploading the footage to the station. Cheekit knew that the Unified Science Council would want that footage. In an emergency session, the Unified Exploration Council determined that a seventh type of xenosentient had been discovered in the Great Gulf. The executors argued that all quasi-authorized and unauthorized colonies or scientific outposts in the Great Gulf should be recalled, by force if necessary. The executors argue that the actions against the precursor artifact show that the Solarians have not only dangerous attitudes but dangerous technology at their disposal. The Unified Science Council counsels caution at this time. 2. Hero League at Cyborg Collective. From Clark 351. Check out the attached file. Just over 100 drones and a precursor war machine, looked like one of their late-generation planetary assault machines. Luckily not one of the big boys, but still more than they could handle. I took it down, but man, it was a fight. Attached are visual files so you can tell I upheld our appearances and standards. I want full point credit for this on the leaderboards. Make sure the files get uploaded to Infonet. I want everyone to check out that last battle. Man, I look good. These bird people, though. I felt bad for them. They didn't stand a chance. Let everyone else on Hero League know that the bird people are pretty formal. They want to see what you look like and know where you're from. Seemed like a cultural thing. Their computer systems are pretty last-gen. Software is worse than even the old manted pre-war software. I made sure to upload footage of my battle to their servers, as per League rules. Anyway, I think this sector needs some heroes. This should put me over the point score needed to get a League assembled trial raid. I'll need a Wallace from Confed INT. 2. They probably want to know what goes on in this sector. This sector needs protected. I should have enough achievements to establish a base at this time. Any League members who want to take part in the trial will be required to put up double standard points to compete. Once a League is assembled, I will be building a base in this sector. There's plenty of heroic deeds to go around out here. Clark 351. Nothing follows. Confederate Intelligence Memo. CC, Artificial Biological States, Digital Artificial Intelligence Infonet Worlds, Terrasol.gov, Cyborg Cooperative, Clone Directorate, Manted Free Worlds, Trinad Hive Worlds. Looks like the LARP group out of the Cyborg Cooperative is starting to patrol the Great Gulf. Someone remind them that they can't open to Villain League at this time. These are first contact species out there. Let's not give them the wrong idea about the Confederacy. We're giving the Hero League permission to establish a League base in that Great Gulf sector, and will be assigning a Director-ranked intelligence liaison. Nothing follows. Cyborg Cooperative. Your last. Will inform the Hero League that at this time only those with a galactic rating or better are allowed in the Great Gulf, and any others will be stripped of rank and banned if they do not return in 15 standard units. Understand that this is a delicate situation regarding first contacts and sapiens. Will allow only Admiral and above members of Federation League LARPers into the Great Gulf. At least those guys follow directives thanks to the quasi-military nature of their organization. Nothing follows. Chapter 6. Knucklet looked at his bridge crew and hummed in satisfaction. He had put together an excellent crew, all skilled in multiple disciplines, with education far exceeding what was culturally norm and a desire to see what was beyond the borders of the Outer Rim's civilized systems. They had chosen a small system, with a dim red dwarf star and only 2 gas giants and 4 standard planets, only one within the habitable green zone where life could be reasonably expected to be found. That planet was dangerous, covered with seas flush with heavy metals dissolved in corrosive liquid H2O, and a small proto-continent covered in jungle where the sharp mountains didn't rake at the sky. The atmosphere was full of CO2 and O2, high in nitrogen, and the ground was laced with radioactives. A dangerous planet, but one that could be exploited for wealth and prestige by those willing to commit to it. Knucklet smiled as his cousin, Pudmit, alerted the crew they were about to leave jump space after nearly a standard year. Knucklet had invested wisely in recreational facilities for the far graspers so that the ship could make the best time through jump space and reach the system. The translation to real space made the entire crew nauseous, but excitement over the prospect of exploiting an entire system that had been untouched even by the precursor war pushed away feelings of ill will. Famet, a Scantech who had served 10 standard years with the unified military fleet, looked up from his instruments and frowned in the way his species usually did, shrinking his bark sack and slapping his tail. Problem? Knucklet asked. Midikak, the Akaltak communications officer, suddenly jerked upright, her wingtips going to her communications headset. Captain? Knucklet turned to the Akaltak female and raised his 4 eyebrows. An emergency? There is a strong signal. The Omni-translator is working on it. Some kind of audio message with a visual component, Midikak chirped. Keep on it, Knucklet said. He turned back to the Saurian. What is the problem, Famet? The lizard male tapped his display. There's heavy energy signals, there's debris around the primary planet, and what looks like 2 large spaceships in orbit around that planet. Do we have visual on them? Knucklet asked. I'm receiving multiple signals from the planet, as if the communications are omnidirectional, unencrypted, and unshielded. The Omni-translator has been able to translate the most common transmissions, Midikak broke in. Putting the visual on the main screen, Midikak said. On the screen the planet was shown. Parts of the jungle were burning. There were large conical metropolises, 4 of which were burning. On 2 different windows on the main view screen were the orbiting spaceships. One was massive, with ominous architecture, kilometers long, with what looked like statues of strange beings with their hands pressed together at their chest holding up various parts of the massive ship. The other looked as if it was cobbled together from debris taken from 100 junkyards and 1,000 debris fields. The jump cores and the 12 engines, all seemingly slapped onto the hull at random areas, were all mistuned and leaking energy in ugly purple halos. Both ships gave the entire bridge crew various symptoms of anxiety. Their appearance was menacing and both were on opposite sides of the planet from one another but still appeared to be maneuvering in order to bring the other into firing arcs. "The signals are ready," Midikak said. She shuddered and Knucklet noticed that her feathers were pressed close, her wings close, and she was squatted down slightly. "I warn you, it sounds like a nest war down there." "Let us hear them," Knucklet said. "For the Emperor! Purge the Xenos! Stomp the Humies! Crush the Squishies!" Behind the roared words were the sounds of laser weapons, stuttering kinetic weapons, the detonations of artillery and explosives. Knucklet made a chopping motion, urging Midikak to cut off the feeds. His kind were no strangers to violence. After all, only 200 years ago nearly 3,000 of his kind had lost their lives during a fierce trade war. But the raw aggression from those transmissions made him quail back in his crash couch. "I have another ship on scanners," Thamid said. "They're rapidly approaching." "They're signaling us," Midikak said. "The Omni-translator can understand them." "Put the news ship on screen and let's hear what the new ones are saying," Knucklet ordered. The news ship was sleek, black with a pair of engines that had gold energy pulsing from them. It was rapidly approaching, flashing small lights in the red range of visual lights. The translator crackled and the news ship's communication blared out. "Hey, who are you?" one voice asked. "This is a sanctioned league game. That isn't even a Codex-recognized ship," another voice asked. "Both of you be quiet," a stern voice said. There was a throat-clearing noise. "Greetings, gentle beings. I am Hammond 83132, a registered and accredited judge of the Clone Directorate branch of the Judges Guild. May I ask your intent? We hold the exploitation rights to this system." "Who are you and are you jumping our claim?" Knucklet said, half rising from his couch. "Hey, we leased this place 5 years ago for our tournament," the first voice protested. "Be silent or I'll deduct the next one of you to speak 80 army points and delay any clone respawn by 6 hours. The judge snapped. Again with the throat-clearing noise. "Pardon, gentle beings. The two competitors are under a great deal of tension. We were not aware of any other claim on this system. This is a sanctioned league game registered with Terrasol Judges Guild and the Battlehammer Entertainment Craftworks League Administration." "What league?" Knucklet asked. He wondered if the Omni-translator was working correctly. There seemed to be terms that it was having problems translating. "The Battlehammer 40,000 League, Clone Worlds Directorate Branch," the judge said. "We're in the middle of a 60,000-point game here." "A game?" Knucklet asked. "Space Marines vs. Orcs," the judge said. "It should be wrapped up in, say, 6 years or so." "But we bought," Knucklet said. "What about the outer planets?" Pontic asked, the amphibian clicking his tongue in anxiety. "Are you using the other planets, the asteroid ring, or the Oort cloud?" Knucklet asked. "The game has gone beyond those areas." "Let me consult with the players," the judge answered. There was a long moment of silence. Midikak pointed at the screens. "I have several feeds from the planet. It's largely encrypted, but one is unencrypted if you wish to view it," she said. "Put it on screen," Knucklet ordered. The screen showed a pitched battle between forces. One massive, with green skin, wearing cobbled-together metal plates painted in wild patterns of red and green. The other figures in power armor, thick and heavy plates, all in red, fighting alongside hordes of smaller bipedal humanoids dressed in green armor and wielding laser weapons. Both the ones in power armor and the ones in the flimsy-looking green armor had icons of some kind of fierce-looking bird on their chest. When Knucklet looked at Midikak, the avian female just made a gesture of confusion. Knucklet noticed that the sheer unbridled violence was making several of his crew ill, even though he himself and Famet were fascinated by it. "Shut it off, Midikak. We've seen enough," Knucklet said. They all sat in silence for a few more moments before the judge returned to the comm line. "I may have a compromise that will be acceptable to both parties. You being the party of the first, the two competitors being the party of the second," the judge said. "If you agree to my arbitration, I will waive all fees, as you are a first contact species, in return for the right for full claim to first contact on behalf of myself and the Judges Guild." Knucklet thought it over. The idea of having to pay a fee to this judge was an anathema, but having fees waived for something that he did not know the value of also disturbed him. Still, he wasn't sure what else he could do. "I agree to waiver of the fees and your conditions," Knucklet said, taking a risk. "No risk, no profit. Both currently tournament-engaged players agree to grant you planetary salvage rights once the clones go offline," the judge said. "Additionally, they grant you salvage rights to the debris fields." Knucklet's eyebrows raised. Salvage rights, now they were talking. In return, they receive the right to continue their competition on the planet's surface and within its orbital area for a period of 6 more years, or until the tournament competition is finished, whichever occurs first, the judge said. 6 years? Knucklet asked. "Yes. I am forwarding the timescale according to radioactive particle decay so that we are using the same time scales. Additionally, they grant you license to view the game in raw data without paying license fees, should you be so inclined," the judge put in. "If you need any assistance, just let them know. Their shipboard cloning banks are running at optimum in case you need manpower." Knucklet was hardly listening. Salvage rights and free assistance. "What about the cities?" Knucklet asked. "Once the clones expire, when the license runs out, we'll leave the cities behind instead of disintegrating them, if you want to salvage them too," the judge said. "As for the military equipment used by the clone soldiers, it's old tech, but you're welcome to the materials. After all, it's just materials, not much use in our post-scarcity confederacy. The technology is not on the first contact Xenospecies prohibited access and trade list, so there is no legal reason to prevent it from being part of the salvage deal." Knucklet didn't understand the last part, but the idea of scavenging and salvaging those huge conical cities made his claws grasp greedily at the arms of his command chair. He also liked this judge. It spoke a language he could appreciate. "Very well," Knucklet said. "We will exploit the Oort cloud, asteroid belts, and the planets outside the one your game is taking place on." "Agreed," the judge said. Knucklet rubbed his hands together. "Salvage rights to alien tech. I am transmitting the legal documents now. As a Gentlebeing's agreement, the game shall continue while you review the terms and conditions of the Judges Guild legal agreement," the judge stated. "I look forward to examining your terms and conditions," Knucklet said, feeling the surge of excitement at dealing with an unknown race's legal code and agreements. "Very well. I look forward to working with you. Please feel free to contact any one of me, should you need further assistance," the judge said. Knucklet barely heard the last part, engrossed in reading the dense legalese of the contract that had just been sent to his displays by Midikak. The longer he read, the more he hummed with pleasure. Any rule and technical specific lawyer who could come up with this thick of an agreement was someone that Knucklet was happy to meet. When the crew of the Far Grasper returned with word of a game played by masters of cloning technology on whole planets, involving short-life clones, the Unified Science Council could scarcely believe it. Despite the technology brought back, crude but highly effective, mostly geared toward war and resource extraction, the Unified Science Council was loath to believe that this so-called clone directorate could exist, much less would be so cruel as to create clones just to force them to fight in a tournament. However, The video logs were incontrovertible, and the fact that the crew of the Fargrasper had somehow learned the rules to this cruel and barbaric game, and played it on computer-driven holographic boards and EVR, all pointed to the fact that this Terran Confederacy had not given up cloning over its obvious moral and ethical considerations. The Unified Military Council pointed out that the willingness to create clone soldiers gave the Solarians, and the Terran Confederacy, and the Clone Directorate, massive manpower advantages. The words of alarm from the executors were being listened to more and more. From Judges Guild to Clone Directorate Intelligence. CC, Confederate Intelligence. Encountered a ship outfitted for resource extraction and exploitation at Hartfield 221 system. Previously unencountered Xenosapiens, 7 Xenospecies total. Most were unwilling to purchase rule sets or holo patterns for proper tournament play. However, 3 species found tournament play to be fascinating, although they are currently only at the level of holoplay, not real play. Have included recordings of small talk, discussion, and play of those 3 species. Are requesting permission to attempt marketing for primary tournament games and a Judges Guild representative. Nothing follows. Confederate Intelligence. CC, Artificial Biological States, Digital Artificial Intelligence Infonet Worlds, Terrasol.gov, Cyborg Cooperative, Clone Directorate, Manted Free Worlds, Trinad Hive Worlds. All subjects within the Long Dark that are not Confederate Actor Intelligence Service agents are ordered to withdraw with the exceptions listed in the attachment. Nothing follows. From Judges Guild, Terra HQ. To all Judges Guild stations. Subject, Long Dark Tournaments. All tournaments must be cancelled. System rental fees will be refunded. Games in progress will be listed as a draw, and all points and fees, not including judge rental fee, will be refunded. Nothing follows. Chapter 7. Many great cycles had passed without a single contact within the Great Emptiness. Many of the members of the Unified Science Council began to believe that perhaps it was some kind of lingering energies left over from the precursor war that had created mass hallucinations, or perhaps it was just isolated incidents with no meaning. 17 great cycles and not a single clue that supported the existence of the Solarians, the Clone Directorate, sentient AIs, or any of the other strangeness discovered over that great cycle. Even the Unified Executor Council had been forced to agree that the Solarians had simply, vanished. The Unified High Council had no choice but to allow exploration of the Great Emptiness, and so passed legislation to repeal the prohibition against exploration of that region of space. That is how Monat Benalti of the Highcroth found himself in charge of a crew of a dozen of the Deep Space Explorers Guild and in possession of one of the most advanced ships the Unified Technology Council would permit to be built. The ship, named to wrest answers from the darkness, had the best jump space engines, the most advanced computers with the most powerful computation and analysis lobes, laboratories and testing capabilities more advanced than any other ship, with sensors more sensitive than any other, communications capable of hearing the slightest whisper. Additionally, the ship's omni-translator had been loaded with the Terrasol lexicons learned so far. That was an entire great cycle ago. Which was why Monat, who refused the title of captain and preferred most learned, was almost sick from boredom despite his race being legendary for patience. Even the upcoming arrival in a new solar system, deeper than anyone had gone so far into the Great Emptiness, failed to alleviate his boredom. How could it? The last 30 systems they'd scanned had been the same, deeper than anyone had explored. And empty except for 100 million years of isolated evolution, largely resulting in a few plants, or maybe even some non-sapient life more evolved than a cluster of cells. Monat was willing to bet his next 3 research grants that the next one would be the same. Preparing to drop, Ostrich stated. A master of astrogation and navigation, who had led whole fleets through jump space with his skill during his many years as part of the unified military fleet, Ostrich was capable of making such sublime jump transitions that even the most sensitive of the scientists suffered little more than a light spell of dizziness. At the end of the countdown there was a slight queasiness, and that was all, allowing Monat to tap his vestigial claws together and stare at Billick, a sensors technician of extreme skill. After nearly an entire cycle, Monat was beginning to wonder if Billick had decided not to do his job out of sheer boredom. "Skin Master Billick?" Monat asked. "A moment, please, most learned one," Billick said. The scan tech looked over at Smack, the chief of maintenance. "Oh, attentive one, Lord and Master of the Mechanical, can you perform a diagnostic upon my lowly instrumentation?" Monat sighed internally. Sometimes he wondered if all the insistence on titles and honorifics made it so things took longer than necessary. A heretical thought, he knew, but one had asked himself many times over his long life. Smack, who was a stickler for protocol, nodded, the ruffle around his neck and down his spine flushing in pleasure. He examined his displays, tapped in some commands, then leaned back. "Your instrumentation and displays are all functioning at over 90% efficiency, most attentive and inquisitive scanning technician," Smack said. At least Billick did not take offense at the obvious omission of honorifics, as he had during the first long cycles of the voyage, as Smack was of the belief that those who joined the Unified Military Council or the fleet were somehow less than those who devoted their lives to other pursuits. "Then it appears, at long last, we have found a system with unknown xenosapients," Billick stated. "There are several settlements on the surface, 4 orbiting stations, solar collectors, and power readings everywhere." "Launch a probe," Monat said. "I will be waiting in my chambers. Announce to me when the probe begins to relay data." Billick nodded as Monat stood up on all 4 legs and moved toward his personal chambers. "Most learned one." Ekotat's voice interrupted Monat's viewing of a lecture on how a stable reaction within the translation chamber of a jump drive was only established one way, despite crackpot claims of other possibilities. "Yes, second leader?" Monat sighed. He doubted that it was going to actually be anything. There had been nearly a dozen false alarms in the first few cycles of his mission. Every time it had turned out to be just a lost colony. "You should come to the bridge immediately," Ekotat said. "Make all due haste." Monat frowned. Ekotat was a Drymarian, cold-blooded quasi-mammal whose race's physiology was almost incapable of excitement. For him to urge haste was unusual and noteworthy. When he entered the bridge, Monat noted that Security Officer Lukamit, a computer code researcher who held a position mostly ceremonial, was busy over his terminals, all 3 of his lab assistants working with him. "What is the emergency? Did something happen to the probe?" Monat sighed, settling into his crash couch. "We lost contact with it, most learned one," Billick stated. "It was intercepted by an energy pulse that shut it down. Soon afterwards we were." "I will inform the most learned," Smack snapped. He looked at Monat. "It was then that we received communication signals. It attempted to open a communications channel but at the same time attempted to penetrate our computer network. Whoever the signal is from, they are most insistent that they be allowed access to our computer systems." Lukamit interrupted, ignoring Smack's flutter of his crest. "We are fortunate that they only use a binary type logic and only binary signaling. This allows me to use the lobes in parallel to more effect than they can. However, they did access the Omnitranslator's lexicon and have been attempting to transfer it to their systems." Monat thought a moment. "Allow it." "But standard is to exchange lexicons," Smack protested. "Do as I command as most learned one," Monat told Smack, fixing him with a stare that used all 4 eyes. Smack backed down. "Lexicon is transferred." "Wait, they've stopped trying to access our systems," Lukamit said. "They've purged their own code and completely withdrawn. We have an incoming signal," Juptet stated, listening closely. "Audio and visual, although only across a limited base 3 primary color scale," They are not permitting any reply. Transmission only. It's quite rude. Monat sighed, fully expecting it to be another lost colony. Probably fallen back to aggression and superstition. Instead, the figure that appeared on the screen was unlike any he'd ever seen. Tall, graceful appearing for a biped, mammalian, with jewels adorning them, dressed in comfortable and gossamer appearing cloth, long golden hair and pointed ears. The female, and it had to be a female as it had mammalian milk ducts that were prominent, was surrounded by scantily clad bipeds that were shorter but had the same lithe build and pointed ears. For some reason she gave off the appearance of being superior to everyone present. As if something more than nature, because nature could never produce such a perfect specimen, had crafted her to be perfection embodied. It was a strange feeling for Monat. When she spoke, it was a strange language, linguistically designed to flow together and sound like music even mathematically. Monat noticed that Smack seemed offended by the being. The translation showed below, at the bottom of the screen. Welcome to the magic realms of Meritarian. I am Queen Rado Salva the Graceful. You may call me Queen, Your Highness, or Radiant Divine One. Smack almost seemed to choke. According to Confederate law, attempting to pirate views via recording probes without a license as well as permission from Galactic Studios Incorporated and Electronic Artistic Studios is a grave violation of our legal rights. That caught Lukamit's attention. As your language is unknown to me, I will assume that you were not meant to intrude upon this realm, and I have decided to extend elven hospitality to you. Monat kept his expression from changing. Another race. Bipedal, warm-blooded, mammalian, forward-facing eyes. Obvious Solarian. I will allow you 4 local hours upon the surface as a freeware demonstration for one of your crew. I formally invite a sentient of your choosing into my realm and invite your ship to stay within communication range of this planet. She gave a gesture that used up the least amount of effort but still looked imperious, as if she was the most important being in the entire universe, and the crew of the rest answers from the darkness should consider them blessed just to be allowed to view her. I will give you 1 of your time units to decide who shall enter the magic realms of Meritarian. The image vanished. They've cut transmission, Jutet stated unnecessarily. Wait, they're transmitting a document. It looks like a legal document of some kind. Monat perked up. Send it my ready room and have the ship computer go over it. Let us see what they are offering. Jutet nodded. Halfway through the time limit, Monat realized that even with the computer's help deciphering the document, which was some kind of terms of service, would be impossible. It was, quite possibly, the largest legal document he had ever seen. The ship's operating system took up less storage and used less data than the document itself. Just viewing the document gave the issuer of the document legal rights over all kinds of things. It repeated over and over that the issuers of the document, 1 Electronic Artistic Studios and 1 Galactic Studios Incorporated, could not be held liable for any damage to anyone using their services, to include death, dismemberment, disintegration, damage to neural or emotional networks, physical or metaphysical discomfort, damage, or alteration. It went on and on and on. But Monat had been tasked with exploration, and he'd seen that Galactic Studios Incorporated and Electronic Artistic Studios operated under Terran Confederacy law and were based on Terrasol, which meant, despite appearances, the Elven Queen was a Solarian. Which made no sense. How many species rose to prominence in the system? Monat needed information, but most of all, he needed a volunteer. And for that, he called Ostrich into his ready room to see if the Saurian would volunteer to be part of the free demonstration that the Queen was offering. To Monat's surprise, Ostrich agreed immediately. Monat figured it was out of boredom. The shuttle that gathered Ostrich was flamboyant, lavishly decorated with rare elements to enhance its appearance, and obviously built to appeal to anyone's eyes. Even mathematically it was almost perfect. Ostrich boarded wearing a vacuum suit and carrying a transponder. The Queen had agreed to that much of a safety measure, even if she refused to allow recording devices. Monat settled down as the shuttle left and waited. For local hours was less than a dozen cycles. When Ostrich returned, he stated one simple sentence. "We must leave now." Monat respected Ostrich's time with the unified military fleet and ordered that the ship move to jump space immediately. Once they were safe in jump space, he called Ostrich into his quarters and urged the reptilian navigator to speak. "When I first got there, I was given many options. Enhance virtual reality, real skin, which apparently involves me actually going down to the planet, skin sheath, which is allowing me to mentally control a cloned version of myself from the station, or something called hitchhiker mode, which is allowing me to see through someone else's eyes," Ostrich said, rubbing his snout wearily. "What did you choose?" Monat asked. "Hitchhiker is the only option available for the free demonstration version," Ostrich said. He shuddered. "It allowed me to not only see and hear what was going on, it allowed me to taste, smell, and feel it. Not only that, I knew I could, well, share thoughts with my host." Monat made an annotation. "Did you?" Ostrich nodded. "She is from someplace called Alpha Centauri, one of the earliest Terran Confederacy's colonies. That's aside, however, and not the important part." Looking up, Monat frowned. "What is important than that?" "She was, to use her words, reborn as something called a dwarf and took the profession of blacksmith," Ostrich said. "Working in iron, steel, some exotic metals I've never heard of. She makes armor, weapons, and other metal objects as well as wood carving." "Who does she make these weapons for?" Monat asked. "Soldiers who guard the town and beings who wish to enter into the wilderness to seek out adventure, even at the risk of encountering dangerous wildlife that will seek to slay them if they do not slay the wildlife first. She makes weapons and armor for these people and then, and I use her words, magics the excrement out of them, which is why." "Magic?" Monat scoffed, interrupting. "A people that advance believing in magic." Ostrich nodded. "When she explained magic to me was when I realized we must leave at once." "What was so frightening about it?" Monat asked, wondering if Ostrich would need therapy. "Nanotechnology is something we use for medical, research, manufacturing, computation," Ostrich said. Monat nodded as Ostrich continued. "They have devised a type of nanite that uses broadcast power to sustain itself and floats through the very air. It permeates the atmosphere, is in everything they drink, everything they eat, even in the objects. Risky. What if it went out of control? Entire planets have been lost to such ill-advised experimentation," Monat asked. Ostrich shook his head. "They aren't worried about it. You see, they use the nanites to manifest certain reactions. From creating a monomolecular sword edge and infusing the blade with nanotech like my host did to calling up fire out of thin air, this so-called magic is nanites." Monat cringed slightly. "And anyone can use it with a simple interface?" Ostrich shook his head again. "No. It requires will, being able to chant out loud the command strings, and being able to withstand pain. The more energy-intensive the task the nanites carry out, the more pain the nanites inflict." "Madness," Monat whispered. "And they willingly subject themselves to this to use this so-called magic? I understand if they are born there and this is the path to power, but still, to willingly subject oneself to pain." Ostrich shook his head. "No, most learned one, it is worse than that." "How is it worse?" Monat asked. "Please, Ostrich, will you define worse?" "While some beings who live on that planet were born there, most learned one." Ostrich took a deep breath. "The majority pay for the privilege of living their lives there. Some even paid to be other species, such as my host, who had her entire body rebuilt from pure strain human to dwarf in order to live out her fantasies." Ostrich fixed Monat with his gaze. "It's a planet-sized, fully interactive, nanite-assisted amusement park that they pay to experience, sometimes for their entire adult lifespan." Monat goggled at Ostrich. The thought of having one's body changed to live out a fantasy was grotesque, but the idea that it was some kind of amusement park horrified him. You were correct in having us leave at once. Was there anything else that made you so urgent to leave? Manot asked. Ostrich nodded. At the end of my free trial, several of the High Elves offered to sponsor me if I agreed to fight in their name for their glory, he said, shuddering. Manot nodded. A wise idea, returning. I do not blame you for wanting to return when that undoubtedly caused such fear, to be dumped in such a place where advanced technology is used to live out a fantasy of primitivism. Shivering, Ostrich shook his head. No, most learned one, I did not want to return out of fear, I returned because I wanted to stay. Ostrich hung his head and whispered softly. Glory and honor to my house, with eggs and burrows the envy of all, by might or trickery my house, my burrow, my clutch ascendant. Manot stared in horror at Ostrich repeating such an ancient mantra of his species and decided that the expedition was over. The Unified Exploration Council examined the records as well as the statements of Fleet Admiral, retired, Ostrich Sashel and ordered another exploration expedition created. The Unified Science Council determined that the Solarians, perhaps the entire Terran Confederacy, was using technologies in ways that were prohibited as well as dangerous, not only to the Terran Confederacy itself, but to all those around it. The Unified Executor Council decided that armed executors would accompany all other research and exploration vessels to prevent any desertions to such a dangerous civilization. Ostrich Sashel converted all of his possessions and wealth to simple gold bars and vanished. I, Ostrich Sashel, agreed to abide by the above terms and services as set out by Galactic Studios Incorporated and Electronic Artistic Studios, as well as the Meritarian Code of Conduct. 2. Confederate Intelligence. From Queen Radosalva the Graceful, Overseer of Meritarian, all rights reserved. Had visitors not long ago, like I told. However, it appears that one of their number liked their trial time so much they've returned to my divine embrace. Lifetime membership purchased. Attached is crude documents and illusions of their statements about the mundane and boring life they left behind, the poor dear. I'm sending these to you out of consideration. He is a lovely subject. Item shop purchase, Platinum Starter Pack, who has been yearning all his life for the adventure. DLC purchased. Only I, in my infinite wisdom and beauty, can provide to him. Item shop purchase, User-generated friends and family Platinum Pack. I have hereby granted him asylum from such a dull and dreary place, and made him a citizen. DLC Mega Pack purchased, of Meritarian, expansion purchased, with permission to found his own house. DLC purchased, as well as quest for his true love. DLC purchased, as well as create offspring. Expansion purchased. I have high hopes for my new subject. Item shop purchase, Kobold Hero Pack, and know that he will go far. Item shop purchase, Dragon-blooded, in my realm. Enjoy your files. Love and kisses. Her eternal elven grace, divine light of the ether, lady of magic and power, Queen Radosalva. Nothing follows. Confederate Intelligence Memo. CC, Artificial Biological States, Digital Artificial Intelligence Infonet Worlds, Terrasol.gov, Cyborg Cooperative, Clone Directorate, Mantid Free Worlds, Trinad Hive Worlds. Xenosapient Government identified. Native species identified. See attachments. Military potential is initially classified as low, to be revisited upon any new information which will be shared to all Confederacy governments, as per treaties. Chance for incursion into Confederate space is high. Place all rimward stations, colonies, planetary governments, and military forces on stage 2 alert. Do not fire unless unable to withdraw or casualties are incurred. Abide by rules of engagement for inferior forces unaware of Confederate military and industrial power. Nothing follows. Trina AD Hive Intelligence. Your last. Let's hope we do better with them than when the two of us first met. Nothing follows. Interlude. Eagleet finished working at his menial job at the factory, a job too low for the corporation to purchase and maintain a robot to perform, and made his way home. Mass transit was crowded that day, with everyone looking down at datapads, working or not, or seemingly involved in conversations on earbuds. Eagleet pretended to be the latter, wearing a non-functioning eyepiece that wouldn't perturb him if it was stolen. By pretending to be in conversation with someone, just mumbling to oneself, no other being would bother him, panhandling or raving or just lonely. Eagleet knew a basic fact that everyone learned on Gulmus Van. Life was lonely. Still, Eagleet felt a surge of anticipation as he entered his small dwelling. It had a basic food dispenser, a basic waste disposal, and a single room. The only two things inside were a comfortable nest, at least as comfortable as someone of his economic status could afford, and an EVR rig that he had recently upgraded to the best he could afford. Even better, he had entered a contest recently and won, which meant his EVR rig was capable of more than he had ever imagined. Today was the day. Eagleet had been looking forward to it for almost a third of a great cycle, since message boards and virtual meeting places had begun talking about it. A new game. It took effort to find information about it. It took effort to even get any previews of it. Eagleet had heard it referred to as an alternate reality game, where there were hints hidden all over, some even in real life. At one point he had found a broken food dispenser with a shiny keypad. He had followed the instructions and punched in his COM code. That night he had received a Galnet address, a one-time use Galnet address. Navigating to it with a text-only communications program had earned him another address, this one deep in the old abandoned sectors of Galnet, where virtual reality games had been tried and failed over the eons. There a rusted and battered robot had given him an orb. The orb contained a file, heavily encrypted, that claimed to be a prize, and it was inscribed with a real mail postal address to a location that the curious had discovered was an old abandoned scientific research station on the edge of the Outer Rim civilized race's territory. He had mailed his address and, "I want to believe," on the actual, physical paper. In return, he'd won a new EVR rig, but had to promise to keep it secret. After all, supposedly agents of the Galwa's corporate security were looking for any outlaws who possessed the rig. It was exciting to play the game. Eagleet, like many others across the unified civilized races, had furrowed out the clues, deciphered the riddles, decrypted the files, and bit by bit, sometimes literally, had discovered more and more about the mysterious game. Each drop of information had intrigued those searching out the data even more. Set on a world before Star Drive, containing only a single species. Set in a world much like their own where corporations ruled everything and government was just a place for the corrupt and incompetent to earn an easy paycheck off of the backs of everyone who paid government extortion. The game promised to be in real time, to link as many players as logged in, with full EVR support. The only downside was it was a single-race game. But what a race! Able to accept cybernetics without pain and suffering and mental anguish. Able to accept enhanced biological parts without rejection. Able to commit violence, and give back some of the misery beings like Eagleet felt every day. Everyone knew someone, a tenth of a great cycle, who had been allowed to play the alpha, and then the beta, test. Who had gotten to experience the world. There were bugs, problems, in the alpha, but by the beta they had been ironed out. Except one. That bug had become a feature. The chance of crippling, agonizing pain if you were killed, that lasted for cycles and couldn't be disconnected from. It even worked player versus player, and Eagleet, like some others who would never admitted it, felt a thrill at the idea of inflicting such agony on another being. It had been an entire third of a great cycle. But today was different. The flashing light that the download was complete. Even the day one patch had finished. Even at Eagleet's slow Galnet connection that was the same that everyone had a right to by the civilized race's rights and entitlements compact. Eagleet ate sparingly, preferring to wait to eat his tasteless paste till he was in the game. He had found the Sal's Diner area during his searches, and found that purchasing a meal there, and then eating his own sustenance gruel made it so he tasted what he ordered. Only 100 or so ARG players knew about Sal's Diner, and yesterday the owner, one of the stocky bipedal primate race, had given him a key that would allow him to find the diner and enter it in the game. A reward. Eagleet shivered with anticipation when the EVR synced up with his body. It was a non-invasive model, a dermal contact rig, but amazingly it worked. He leaned back and closed his eyes, consciously surrendering his two motor control cortexes to the EVR rig. Welcome to Cyberlife. You are number 2312135 out of 2312135 appeared in front of him. But his participation in the ARG had given him something better. He reached out and tapped the little bouncing whiskered cartoon creature called a dog twice, scratched its belly, then said its name. Goob. The scene in front of him, a fairly boring Galnet holding weight screen, vanished. He felt like he was being sucked through tubes that looked like they were made of neon and electricity. It stung slightly, which thrilled him because he knew that it wasn't a lie. Pain was part of the risk. It dumped him out in darkness with a single window. Welcome, I am Eagleet Male. You are 15 out of 16. The number dropped to 0 and he felt a surge of disorientation. It stung again, but once again, it thrilled more than bothered him. He found himself on a street. It used black pavement, an archaic form of roadway that the ARG players actually had to look up in ancient data archives. He was sitting against a wall, made of red brick, dressed in black clothing. His stomach hurt, and in his hand he held a projectile weapon. Blood was around him, and on his stomach. Come on, we gotta get moving, another avatar said, reaching down. Can you walk? Eagleet nodded. To continue you must accept the terms and conditions. Would you care to read them or do you accept them? The pain vanished and Eagleet felt weirdly disconnected from the game. He didn't like that, and being in a hurry, he just clicked, I accept, and was gratified when the pain returned and the other avatar heaved him up. Don't talk, we'll get you to the dock. We'll get you a new face, then we'll get you out of Corpus CC's sights. In his apartment, in the real world, Eagleet sat in darkness for hours. He was in no hurry to disconnect. He did not have another labor shift for 5 days, the minimum amount of hours he could receive as a voluntarily employed citizen. In the EVR world, he had named himself Kalshina, after a girl he had liked in cultural education. He was a neuromancer, a wizard of the crude but amazing version of Galnet, good with a gun, and a cyberpunk with fiber-optic hair that changed colors, swirling electric tattoos, and facial piercings. By morning he was part of a gang of fellow ARG players. The orb he had found with the encrypted program, when the program was loaded, was a coupon to let him choose a pistol and a submachine gun to start with. Sal's Diner turned out to be a place they could sell ill-gotten wear and purchase illegal tech and weaponry, even get cybernetics. Eagleet got cybernetic eyes, an induction cyberjack that he could never afford in the real world, and cybernetic wiring that made him better with his smart gun. Others didn't dare. The very thought repulsed them. Eagleet/Kalshina/Crashrider sneered at them. Anarchy was life. Netrunning was life. Resistance was life. Eagleet was hooked. And he didn't care. He was an outlaw, but he had his chummers. Which was more than he had in what they all sneeringly referred to as meat space. Unified Intelligence Council Memo. The game's cyberlife encourages antisocial behavior in its playstyle, and has unrealistic depictions of violence and crime. An attempt at suppressing it has caused no less than 90 different law firms on over 50 planets to engage in defending the game under archaic freedom of artistic expression laws. Only the user interface and supporting software is stored on the player's local machine, unlike standard massive multiplayer worlds. It appears their system transmits user input to servers, which are currently protected by mountains of slavering angry lawyers with credit signs in their eyes. Even login names are property of Galnet Artistry Incorporated, as is the avatar appearance, making it difficult to get warrants to electronically spy on any players. Galnet Artistry Incorporated is less than 3 great cycles old. Funding was apparently done through the anonymous donation site, FUNDMYDREMS, to the tune of literal billions of dollars. Programming was done via public listserv, code sites that were password encrypted. Code acquired was variations of older code, nothing special, just applied in a strange way. Unified Science Council suggested that the game was built by largely inexperienced coders using publicly available freeware code and volunteer coders, which is the reason for the unstable algorithm rather than any malevolent or secretive reason the game's streaming code is unable to be broken. Further examination is needed. End message. Confederate Intelligence Bulletin. Subject: Cyberlife. CC: Artificial Biological States, Digital Artificial Intelligence Infonet Worlds, Terrasol.gov, Cyborg Cooperative, Clone Directorate, Mantid Free Worlds, Trinad Hive Worlds, Electronic Artistic Studios Incorporated, Galactic Studios Incorporated, Von Neumann Artificial Intelligence Creations. Penetration of cyberlife exceeds estimates. Evaluation of number beings with free time to reach level 3 or higher within the alternate reality game suggests automated economy with low chance of employment or advancement. Average player online time is 3 to 7 local work cycles. Average player engagement is 80%. 10% of players make power and ability purchases in the online store. Those often have the least engagement in time and effort in the game. Terran estimates that these are the wealthy. Have added visual effect when player makes power or ability purchase in store to warn other players. This has resulted in chump hunting, as predicted. Nearly 95% of players online 2 or more local work cycles prefer to sleep in-game and use the game's dream generator rather than go offline. Estimated less than 0.1% realize most NPCs are artificial or virtual intelligences. Online store was hacked by in-game players using in-game technology and infrastructure at 70% of estimated time, suggesting a desperate desire for luxuries even if they only exist in EVR. In-game item shop purchases are primarily cosmetic decorations. Power-ups and gear enhancements reduced customer engagement and resulted in less customers online. This had been rectified by the Streetwear War story arc, causing the power-up and gear enhancements available on the online store being looked at as dangerous drugs and enhancements that mark out wealth players who are often set upon by gangs and eliminated. 80% of players spend 30% or more of their time socializing in public areas or at private living spaces with others, suggesting a high loneliness index concurrent with low social health infrastructure. Game is operating at only a 25% budget loss and is estimated to break even next quarter. Pain as a stimulus has driven off casual players as well as the wealthy and privileged. Conversations between players continue to be logged, providing valuable insight to the lives of players and their place in culture and society. CLONINT is requested to add additional players as well as engage in conversations. BScienT has reported, Good Boy Gang members are among the most popular of companions. This suggests low emotional connection between players and other members of their culture/society. TRANT reports high level of success playing as Ghosts in the Net and Rogue AIs. DasScienT has suggested a free work cycle period in order to encourage more players. This has been approved by CONINT. Next bulletin in 18 hours. Nothing follows. Chapter 8. It always happens. Things go well. Beings think they are the one on top and it will never change. The status quo is how the universe was always meant to be, and so it will always be that way. That the apex species will always be apex. But it always happens. The strongest military always believe that they will always be strongest. The fastest ship will always be the fastest. The most powerful weapon will always remain the most powerful. And still it happens. The smartest and wisest believe that they've learned and discovered all there is to discover, and so they are the authority on everything. And then it happens. It's a law of the universe. It always happens. Most species never get to understand this law before this law destroys them. It was a law humans had learned early. If it can go wrong, it will go wrong, and it can always be worse. The humans knew this. They taught it to one another before they even built their first cities. They taught it to the mantid hive queens. They taught it to my people, the Trinad. They taught it to one another again and again and again. Nobody had taught it to the Unified Civilizations Council in centuries, perhaps eons. And so it happened. Not that the Unified Councils understood when it started to happen. No. They didn't understand it, but they knew who they wanted to blame. Which meant it happened. And it got worse. Gather close this document, which bears silent witness to not only what happened, but why. Click O'Malley Trinad Historian, 3241 HPD, Human Post-Diaspora. Dashin was born before scarcity had been defeated. His brain was perfectly healthy, yet it did not operate the same as others. That had been unacceptable, and his brain was altered so that his thoughts were acceptable. He earned a meager wage doing a job that a robot could not do without being more expensive than paying Dashin to do the work. This altered his thoughts back to what they had been, only he was older now, and wiser. When war came, Dashin signed up voluntarily, unlike the majority of his people. They died when the planet was glassed. Dashin did not. Dashin was busy killing. Not because he enjoyed it, but because it did not bother him. And he was good at it. Better than the machines. Afterwards, Dashin returned to society, and society told him that he did not think right. That was fine. Dashin did not care. He just wanted left alone. But more wars took place. For Dashin, the problem with war wasn't the killing, is that he wasn't left alone. If he joined, he had to be part of a society. If he did not join, then someone else wanted to bother him with the business end of a plasma rifle. And he just wanted to be left alone. During one of the wars, Dashin volunteered to undergo process to turn him into a complete full conversion cyborg. That cut away everything but his brain, his eyes, his lower jaw, and his face. It was then he met Fido. After the war, he just wanted left alone. Clinically immortal, he found himself drifting further and further from the rest of humanity. Not that he hated them, not that he looked down on them, not that he disliked them. He just wanted left alone. He couldn't remember when he had left his face behind during an upgrade. The call of exploration had consumed him after the Trinad War. Fido liked exploring what was called the Long Dark with Dashin. Fido felt bad for his part in the Rigel-Saurian War. Fido liked being with Dashin. Dashin made him feel like a Goodba, not a Warba. For the most part, Dashin avoided all but the I-run stations. He would report interesting things to the Federation, then the Combine, then the Republic, and now the Confederacy. His body, the best he could afford, had been built in the great nanoforges of Mercury Sol. He was at home in vacuum, or the harshest environment. He made sure Fido was as strong and fast and tough as he was. Because Dashin liked Fido. Fido liked Dashin. Dashin was disappointed that beyond the Long Dark there were more people. Well, Dashin figured they'd be people, because he wanted to be left alone and people never did leave him alone. So he turned back into the Long Dark and began drifting from system to system, looking for anything interesting. Dashin enjoyed watching a flower open for the first time with a nanoprobe. He got a thrill down his chassis watching the sun rise and small animals wake up with optical scanners. It made the few inches remaining of his spinal cord tingle to see small cubs and chicks blink into the light. He just wanted left alone. He would view others, but he would leave them alone also. which made the fact that a ship had dropped into the system he was currently inhabiting, orbiting a gas giant and extracting the resources he needed, just his luck. The ship was screaming for help across multiple spectrum, using multiple languages, all of them from the lexicons that he had taken as his due from the ship he had rendered assistance to in the past. Dashin reached out with some of his scanners, since he was plugged fully into his ship, making him the ship, and touched the other craft. The hull was damaged in several places. Kinetic weaponry and what looked like a brush from a high-intensity energy weapon. It wasn't bleeding atmosphere, which meant the crew had either gotten it under control or they had given up on trying to maintain atmosphere. The new ship was armed. Light damage capacity older weapons that wouldn't have qualified as military-grade weapons when Dashin had first joined a military. Even the strongest weapon the ship possessed wouldn't register on Dashin's debris shields. The weapon showed signs of having been utilized recently, before the ship had entered jump space only to tumble out in the barren system that Dashin was currently occupying. But the ship was crewed by the living. But they were not his people, and he was not bound to help unclassified Xenosapiens engaged in combat. But they were screaming for help. For long ticks of the ship's atomic clock, Dashin considered if he cared enough to help them. On one hand, they needed help. He was bound to help others. On the other hand, he wanted left alone. Then the alarms went off again and Dashin fluttered his debris shield in his version of surprise. Helljump detected. Helljump detected. Bad boy. Dashin bad boy. Old boy. Death boy Dashin. Fido had detected the energy surge at the same time as Dashin, smelled it so to speak, and identified it while Dashin was busy dropping his ship into the atmosphere of the gas giant to hide, while he decided what he wanted to do. He just wanted left alone. But the one screaming for help was not the belligerent. It was not the aggressor. And what was chasing them was the enemy of everyone. Dashin knew that it wouldn't leave him alone. Dashin felt something he had not felt in centuries, a thing he thought he had left behind with his flesh when he had traded it for metal. The taste of iron and copper on a missing tongue, hammering of his pulse on temples long gone, the thudding of a heart left behind. The taste of hatred. The taste of wrath. New boy scared. New boy. Hurt by bad boy. Help. Dashin help. Dashin felt himself come alive in a way he did his best to avoid. The part of his brain that they said was wrong, the part that they had tried to fix, the part they had tried to convince him to let them cut away, woke up as he stared at the scan of the newcomer. Dashin just wanted left alone. But the newcomer would never leave him alone. Would never leave anyone that it encountered alone. Until it was alone. Dashin reached out and tickled Fido's petting nerve, both the calm Fido and Center himself. Help. Dashin help. We will, Fido, Dashin let his companion know with a few data pulses. Wake up the boys. Fun boys, wake up. Fun boys, wake up. Dashin felt the virtual intelligences slumbering within his ship's computer systems wake up as Fido fed them data pulses, fed whirling particles to them. The Funwa, all dedicated virtual intelligences designed from the ground up by the Digital Artificial Sentient System's best 6 growers, woke up and eagerly awaited for Dashin to provide the data they needed. We help. New boys? Yes. Dashin knew what he was facing. He had Fido loaded into his disaster frame, loaded himself into his disaster frame, dropped a message torpedo deep into the gas giant with orders for it not to launch for the nearest Terran Confederacy message beacon until after the newcomer was destroyed or left the system. Help. Dashin help. Yes. Dashin fired up his engines, brought up all of his shield, not just the debris shield, spun up his projectors. The 6 did checks on his weapons as it slipped into the weapons systems, scampered into the shielding to ensure it was optimally deployed, and slithered into the ship's systems to ensure everything ran at 100% capacity. May I be of assistance? Dashin sent to the damaged and screaming ship. and armed his C-plus cannons. Chapter 9. Naktidi was the captain of the Boom or Bust, a well-outfitted colony and resource exploitation ship that represented her species' first permitted colony in over 2 centuries. The fact that the colony choices were either barren or lightly surveyed didn't bother her. Not did it bother her that the best bet was a superficially surveyed system in the dead zone. The precursor war had been over 100 million years prior, which meant that the planets had possessed plenty of time to recover from that war. The fact that it had been surveyed nearly 500 years before was of no matter, that was just longer for the ecosystems to recover. With the new jump space lane, the trip, which would have taken nearly 15 years prior, only took a mere 6 months. Naktidi had planned carefully for recreation facilities and animal exercise areas on the ship to ensure that all of her crew, the colonists, and the animals would all be as healthy as possible when they arrived. Arrival was celebrated throughout the ship when the ship dropped from jump space to real space, and the bounty they had received was revealed to them. The system was more than promised. 22 planets, 6 of them gas giants, 2 gas planets, 3 habitable planets inside the green zone, for Naktidi's species. 5 asteroid belts, 2 of them within the green zone, which made them ripe for resource extraction. There were 4 dwarf planets, 1 of them a moon around a gas giant that could be good mineral and gas extraction and refinery base. The star was young, in its energetic phase, and had strong stellar winds. The colonists were dropped on the best planet, the second one into the green zone, between the 2 asteroid belts, and began the hard work of supervising the automatons that quickly began building the colony. Naktidi watched the Boom or Bust separate into different parts. 1 to become a Wayfair space station, 1 to become a refinery, 1 to become a shipping station, 6 shuttles, and the smaller, sleeker It Tastes Sweet which Naktidi would use to seed the system with buoys, arrays, and do more in-depth surveys of the other planets with probes. For the first 3 years everything went smoothly. Buoys in both real space and jump space proclaimed the system was owned by the Lidemac Consortium. The arrays slowly unfolded and began to gather and transmit data, and the probes showed that the area was rich in resources. There were even precursor ruins on some of the airless moons and planets, which had the colony's scientists rejoicing. Even if no new information could be gleaned from those ruins, old answers to old questions merely proved the old answers were right all along and proved the superiority of old answers over new questions. But any human could have told her, if it's going to smoothly, it's going to hurt when it's jammed in the rest of the way. Naktidi had enjoyed her part in establishing the colony. It made her whiskers twitch with pride that her name had been used for the trading capital of the colony. She enjoyed the challenge and hard work of supervising her crew and automated probes as they surveyed and examined the system. In the coming days, the biggest question that would be asked by the unified civilized race's various councils was, why? Any human could have told them. Because it could. Because it wanted to. Because you were there. The first hint anyone had was an anomalous energy reading between the system, which had been labeled Rich New Worlds, usually called Rich System 32, and a neighbor merely 14 light-years away. It wasn't real space scanners or arrays that picked up the energy reading. It was a navigation buoy tethered in jump space. According to the buoy, the reading was only 2 minutes of energy, starting from a light pulse and growing to something massive before dissipating. The colonists assumed that the buoy had been somehow damaged when the diagnostic reported that the buoy, built and designed to hold position in jump space, had somehow gotten jump-scorched. They had barely had time to discuss the data between the colony's scientific council when the source of the energy reading made its presence known. By tearing open a tear in space-time that leaked the energy of jump space as well as other unknown energies for it to enter the system. Naktidi saw the scanning tech tear his earpiece away as the scanner reported the energy signature of the tear as a scream that left blood dribbling from the tech's ear. That scream, that heralded the arrival of the newcomer, was echoed as the ship swept down upon the colony. Naktidi ordered the suite in system when the colonists began screaming for suite to save them. She knew it would take 2 days to reach the colony. The scanner could detect energy signatures like an artificial star but no ship. The colony's voice was silenced within 2 hours. It took over a day before Naktidi saw the ship on visual scanners, a day before visual light scanners were able to see the ship. It made Naktidi glad that the visual images were over, the law of light speed delaying the visual for a full day. "Captain Naktidi, it's on visual," Veckan said, putting it up on the screen. The entire bridge crew stared at the screen. The planet, formerly blue and green, was nothing but gray clouds. Orbiting the planet was a ship the size of a subcontinent. It was irregular, no smooth lines, like a jagged-edged flattened egg. It was black and brown, the details fuzzy by light degradation. As Naktidi watched, light speared from the massive ship into the atmosphere, causing the clouds to flee but the atmosphere to bloom up toward the ship. A few began crying as the ship fired again and again at the planet. "Energy contact! 80,000 kilometers and closing!" Veckan cried out. "Correction, many contacts approaching rapidly! Debris shields to maximum power!" Naktidi barked. "Action stations! Helm, evasive action! Scan, what are they?" Slamming shut her visor, Naktidi thought fast. If it was kinetic weapons, the debris shields would brush it aside easily. If it was missiles that would explode, the point defense would pick it off nearly a kilometer from her ship, long before even fission weapons could damage the ship. Lektat ordered the computer to go to evasive action and the ship began looping through a randomized pattern the computer came up with. Veckan queried the computer, ordering it to figure out what the incoming objects were based on by flight profile, makeup, shape, drive status, if any, and any other profile it could use. "Computer doesn't know. Undiscovered objects," Veckan got out. "Incoming is compensating, switching to manual," Lektat yelled out, slapping the button and grabbing the joysticks as soon as they popped up. Naktidi almost vomited as Lektat spun the ship and tried to vector away radically. The ship's superstructure groaned. "Second wave detected! 80,000 and closing!" Veckan suddenly yelled. "First wave at 20. The world went mad. The missiles detonated at 20 kilometers. Graviton compression on a fusion blast that turned the ravening energy into a dozen spears of charged lightning bolts that raked the ship. Engine 2 is destroyed, Engine 5 is not responding, internal gravity is offline, rear debris shield is offline, reactor 2 is offline, decks 16 to 30 are open to space." Chikuva called out, his voice tight with stress as he had to do his job for the first time in his life. "Damage control crews to stations. Repeat." "Hear they!" Veckan screamed. Lektat spun the ship on all 3 axes, seemingly trying to accelerate in 3 directions at once and retrobrake in 2. He reached out and slapped another button. Jump space, jump! The world heaved again as the missiles exploded 20 kilometers off the ship. The majority of them missed, thrown off by Lektat's desperate manual actions. 2 hit. 1 speared through damage control central, killing the 6 crew members. The other ripped across the front of the bridge. The atmosphere wasn't pulled out, it was compressed, ignited, filling the bridge with plasma. 3/4 of the bridge crew died instantly. Due to their face shields not closed, they hadn't worn their armor or even their vacuum suits, they were too close to the corona of the energy beam. "Red, the core of the beam is red," Naktidi thought. The suite vanished into jump space. Naktidi stared at the tear through the primary, secondary, and safety bulkheads, the tear going through the maintenance spaces, the forward shield emitter, and the reactionless thrusters, exposing the surviving bridge crew to jump space for a split second before the emergency jump shields managed to spin up. Naktidi watched in horror as most of the survivors evaporated away, their molecules ripped apart, and scattered across light years of jump space. Leaving her, Lektat, Chikuva, and Veckan alone on the bridge when the ship dropped into real space. Naktidi didn't remember throwing up inside her helmet, but she must have. She could smell the sharp tang of ozone and scorched biological material from the self-cleaning visor doing its work. She could hear Chekova gasping, his vac suit flashing red across the shoulders to signify a major injury. He was using his 2 right arms to hold his 2 left arms where they'd been ripped away by jump space exposure. "Medical to the bridge, emergency," Naktidi coughed. Chekova shook his head. "Medical's gone," he gasped. The beam speared straight through the ship's armored and shielded core. "Making course for the resonance zone boundary. Jump drive recharging, Captain, but it's slow. I think it's damaged," Lektat snapped. "Full real space speed." Getting inside the resonance zone meant nobody could drop from jump space to real space near them. It was usually used to avoid pirates. Not that thing. Naktidi felt her ship groan and shudder around her as she got up, moving to the wall to grab the medical pack. She had always thought it wasteful to put one on the wall of the bridge. After all, anything that hit the bridge would kill everything on it. Maybe it would have been better. "Don't knock me out," Chekova said, shuddering. His suit was treating him for shock, pumping him full of chemicals to keep him conscious. The Unified Ethics Council had long stated that the ships having vac suits and armor that kept someone awake while injured was a crime, but now Naktidi was grateful for it as she used the computer to treat his injuries without knocking him out. "We're across the border. Jump space drive is almost charged," Lektat said. "Plot a course back to." Naktidi started to order. She was looking right at dark space when it happened less than 10,000 kilometers away. She was staring straight through the tear in the bulkhead into the darkness when it happened. It was like a talon tearing open real space. As the tear formed, red and purple fire pouring from the rip with purple, neon green, and red energy. Inside the rip Naktidi could see swirling flames and energy, and for a moment she could swear she saw shadows like limbs reaching pleadingly toward her ship. Flames can't exist in vacuum. Her shocked brain tried to reassure her, tried to tell her that it wasn't happening. The rip split wider, the black edge of the massive ship pushing through it. To Naktidi's eyes, space bulged around the rip, like flesh pushed aside by some monstrous blade. As she watched the ship forced its way through the rip, forcing it wider and wider as the ship pushed its way through. When it fully emerged, the tear rippled for a heartbeat before closing with the sound of a heavy metal door with rusted hinges shutting. But sound can't transfer in space, Naktidi's mind argued. Right before the ship screamed. A terrifying high-pitched screech of a predator who had found its prey. On all the screens, for a second, was displayed a simple message. "There is only enough for one of us." And everything went dark as the ship's computers died. Chapter 10. The lights flickered red across the shattered bridge as the emergency systems came online, revealing that the forward half of the bridge was carbonized wreckage, seared by when the bridge atmosphere had been turned into a plasma cloud. There were seats holding parts of the crew that had been left when the short trip through jump space had torn them apart at a molecular level. The ship tumbled, bleeding air and energy and debris. 2 vac suits, thankfully only worn by corpses, spun into the void. "Ship computer cores are out. Completely fused, rotating backups from cold storage," Chekova panted, the meds in his system keeping him from going into shock despite having 2 of his arms ripped away in a haze of freed molecules being spread across light years. "Right before they fused out they reported that something was physically touching them, even though that is impossible." "It spoke," Lektat moaned, taking his hands off his ears. "That ship, it spoke." He had blood on his palms from where he'd covered his ears. Naktidi looked at her helmsman. "What did it say?" she asked, remembering what she'd seen on the screen. "It told me to run home," Lektat said. He glanced at his computer as it came up. "Jump drive is charged." Screens came up and Chekova gagged as the ship suddenly swung away from the behemoth and accelerated. "Secondary cores are fused, Only one deep storage core remains. Liquid coolant is operating at only 30% of efficiency. There's some kind of resonance in the gel, Shakova gasped. I've never seen software, firmware, or hardware damage like this before. The ship suddenly went dark again as the sole remaining lobe died. Before it went, it screamed across the speaker. Only one! And imploded. All systems on local control, Shakova said. He coughed. Get us into jump space. Unidentified ship is closing, Vekin said, raising his head and coughing. Most of my scanners are either destroyed or the software's crashed. What readings I am getting don't make sense. I'm having to rely off of optical measurements and estimates. What do you mean? Naktidi asked, feeling a rush of joy that her scantech was still alive. Putting it on your display, Vekin said. Naktidi looked at the screen and jerked back. According to the scanners, what was coming straight at them was a burning skull of her own species, jaws stretched in a silent scream of agony, flames puffing from the jaws. Written over and over was, "There is only enough for one of us," across the screen in twisted and writhing script. Lock down the ship, Total Emkin, rig for silent running. Naktidi found herself giving an order she had learned about in captain's school but never thought she would ever need. Nobody but pirates and pirate hunters had used it in centuries. Rigging for silent running, Shakova said, taking over the communication station from his damaged control panel. He looked back. To be honest, Captain, there isn't many systems that are still up. Any worse and we're going to have to go to the jump core and tell it directly what we want. He gave a weak laugh. Unknown ship is still gaining, Vekin said. That's impossible. It's too big to get that kind of acceleration, Shakova said, shaking his head. It's too big to even move with any known drives. It's the size of a moon. Get out and tell it that, Lektat said. He reached across his displays and typed an order, bringing close-range passive scans onto one of his. His eyes widened and he suddenly yanked his joysticks, spinning the ship again on all three axes. Naktidi was positive that Lektat was trying to create a fourth axis for the ship to move on. Many incoming! Lektat cried out. Jump space jump. Naktidi expected him to hit the emergency jump button again. It would discharge the entire jump core. It was risky, but it would throw the ship into jump space for a few moments and drop the ship at the closest star. It also damaged the jump drives and the jump core. The ship moved again into jump space. Naktidi would be asked to describe the sensation of being exposed to jump space, explain the eye-watering flow of color, the sense of mass moving past you, the feeling that time was stretched out. All she could do was stare at it, watching vapors slowly spill from outside the ship, through the damaged bulkheads, and into the bridge. We can't stay here long, Naktidi said. Turn us toward home. No! Lektat shouted. Naktidi looked at him, and he shook his head. No, we can't lead it back. If we lead it back, it will do to whichever world we bring it to what it did to our home. Naktidi felt like she crumpled up inside of herself. You will be consumed here. Everyone on the bridge screamed as the shrieking voice made itself heard by vibrating the bones of their skulls. When the voice ended, Vekin looked up, the fur around his eyes suddenly white with stress. It's behind us, he whispered. That's impossible, you can't follow another ship in, Naktidi said. Her display flickered to life, writhing twisting code appearing around the edges of the window that displayed the rear hatch optical sensor. The massive black ship was approaching in jump space. And gaining. In her defense, Naktidi's people were herbivores who wouldn't pass up the odd tasty insect or smaller creature now and then. She was not used to being prey, she wasn't used to feeling doom rumbling behind her, whispering twisted promises of death and suffering into her brain, onto her displays, into her soul. There is only enough for one. Naktidi shrieked and hit the emergency jump icon. While still in jump space. To the surviving crew members felt like they were being turned inside out. Others felt like they were being stretched across infinity. Still others felt as if they were sucked into themselves until they were little more than the size of a proton. For a third of the crew, how they felt is what happened. The ship dropped out of jump space and Naktidi felt the ship shudder, saw the icons on her screen, of the jump drives failing and the jump core venting into the ship. There was nobody there alive anyway. "Any ships, anyone, help us!" Veckan said over the comms. "Where?" Naktidi coughed. "Where are we?" "Astrogation and navigation is down, no telling." Veckan coughed. "Hanging from a branch by a broken thumb," Chakava said weakly. For long moments the only sound to Naktidi's ears was the sound of Veckan begging someone, anyone, for help and Chakava coughing. "Jump drive is charging," Lektat said. "Slowly, but the core is damaged and discharged into the ship." "Casualties?" Naktidi asked, dreading the answer. Chakava shook his head. "Everyone in the surrounding 3 decks was already dead." Naktidi opened her mouth to reply when the scream sounded out again, and the monitors all displayed "there is only enough for one" over and over and over. Lektat pulled the ship around, trying to coax every iota of speed he could from the damaged and battered ship. Diving for the nearest celestial body, a gas giant that was yellow-streaked with red. "Unknown vessel at 1.2 million kilometers and closing," Veckan said, his voice sounding weary and defeated. "It jumped in inside the boundary again." Naktidi thumbed the icon for ship-wide broadcast. "Prepare yourselves," she said, tears rolling from her eyes. "We are about to join our ancestors, our shipmates, and our families that were on the colony." She leaned back. "It has been a pleasure," she said. "We're receiving a transmission, multiple wavelengths, multiple bands," Veckan said, suddenly sitting up. "What is it?" Naktidi asked, privately wanting to tell Veckan to order whoever it was to flee. "May I be of assistance?" The voice, calm and assured, asked her in unified civilization standard. The other part of the message was in text. "Good boy will help new boy." End of chapter. If you enjoy the story, please leave a like and comment to let me know you want more. Make sure to support the author by liking the official story page on Royal Road, link in the description. Patreon can also be found in the description.